like to call the hearing to order. Good morning. I'd like to welcome our witnesses today. Before I introduce them, I want to say on behalf of the full committee that our hearts and our prayers go out to the individuals in New York, the families and the friends of those who were affected by a senseless terror act. To most on this committee, we've come to expect this. We spend countless hours working through the threats that exist to this country and around the world. And it's sad that we've come to the point where really nothing can happen that surprises us. But it's the responsibility of this committee to work hand in hand with our intelligence community to help to keep America safe by providing the tools that they need to accomplish their mission. We will continue to do that. As is the case that we're here today, and I welcome our witnesses, Colin Stretch, Vice President, General Counsel at Facebook, Sean Edgett, General Counsel at Twitter, and Kent Walker, Senior Vice President, General Counsel at Google. For several months now, the media has been fixated on the role that social media platforms played in spreading disinformation and discord during the 2016 elections. This is an opportunity for each of you to tell your respective stories and, if necessary, correct the record. My sense is that not all aspects of those stories have been told accurately. I'll note for the record that this committee is now having its 17th open hearing this year, and the 12th at which we'll be discussing Russia and Russia's activities. Today, I'm hopeful we can provide the American people with an informed and credible assessment of how foreign actors used your platforms to circulate lies and to agitate unrest during last year's elections. I'm also hopeful you'll share with us what your companies are doing to make it harder for foreign actors to use your platforms, automated accounts, and falsified stories to influence sentiment in the United States. Very clearly, this kind of national security vulnerability represents an unacceptable risk, and your companies have a responsibility to reduce that vulnerability. While we're on the topic of responsibility, I want to use this forum to push back on some narratives that have been sprung up around this subject. A lot of folks, including many in the media, have tried to reduce this entire conversation to one premise. Foreign actors conducted a surgical, executed covert operation to help elect a United States president. I'm here to tell you, this story does not simplify that easily. It is short-sighted and dangerous to selectively focus on one piece of information and think that that somehow tells the whole story. We've heard from the media how a series of, I quote, Russian-linked Facebook ads were specifically aimed at Michigan and Wisconsin during the lead-up to last year's presidential election, unquote. And that, quote, some of those ads targeted specific demographic groups in 2 states, unquote. The narrative here is that ads linked to Russia were targeted at pivotal states and directly influenced the election's outcome. What you haven't heard is that almost 5 times more ads were targeted at the state of Maryland than of Wisconsin. Maryland, which is targeted by 262 ads in comparison to Wisconsin's 55 ads. And Maryland was not up for grabs. It was a state that Democrat candidate carried by 26%. Of the 35 of the 55 ads targeted at Wisconsin ran prior to the Wisconsin primary, before there was an identified Republican candidate. And moreover, that not one of those 55 ads mentioned President Donald Trump by name, or that the key election state of Pennsylvania had fewer ads targeted at it than Washington, D.C., where 87% of the electorate voted for Hillary Clinton, or that the 3 most heavily targeted states in America, Maryland, Missouri, and New York, were all determined by at least 18-point margin, and 2 of them won by Hillary Clinton. One point the media has gotten correct is that more of these geographically targeted ads ran in 2015 than 2016. Again, before President Trump was identified as a Republican candidate for president. But some of the context surrounding the more than $100,000 worth of divisive ads on hot-button issues purchased by Russian actors is missing. To add some detail here, where the media has failed to do it, and put the $100,000 into a frame of reference, the total ad spend for the state of Wisconsin was $1,979, with all but $54 being spent before the primary. Again, before the emergence of a Republican candidate. The ad spend in the state of Michigan was $823. Pennsylvania, $300. To believe the narrative that you have to accept that these sophisticated, well-resourced Russian actors studied our process, assessed what states would be critical to the election result, then snuck and invested all of $300 to execute their plan in Pennsylvania. $300. More than 5 times as much money was spent on advertising in California, a state that hasn't voted Republican in presidential elections since 1988. Even with the benefit of numbers and what can be calculated and measured, this is an incredibly complex story. We can look at the amount of money spent, the number of ads purchased, and draw conclusions about priorities. We can look at the divisive content of the ads and the pages that they directed people towards, and the number of tweets and retweets and the manipulated search results and drawing inferences about the intent of the information operation. What we cannot do, however, is calculate the impact that foreign meddling in social media had on this election, nor can we assume that it must be the explanation for an election outcome that many didn't expect. I understand the urge to make this story simple. It's human nature to make complex, manageable, find explanations and interpret things in ways that conform to your conclusions. But that's biased. Pointing to a state and saying that no ads ran there after the election doesn't prove intent or even motive. It just shows that no ads ran there after the election. This subject is complicated. There's a whole new vocabulary that comes with this stuff. Impressions are different than views. Views are different than clicks. But there's one thing that I'm certain of, and it's this. Given the complexity of what we've seen, if anyone tells you they've got this all figured out, they're kidding themselves. And we can't afford to kid ourselves about what happened last year and continues to happen today. That complexity, I'll note, is exactly why we depend on you for expert insight and reliable information. 60% of the U.S. population uses Facebook. A foreign power using that platform to influence how Americans see and think about one another is as much a public policy issue as it is a national security concern. Crafting an elegant policy solution that is effective but not overly burdensome demands good faith and partnership between companies and this committee. Just recently, on the basis of a more complete and sophisticated analysis, the original estimate that 10 million Americans were exposed to Russian origin content on Facebook was increased to 126 million. That tells me that your companies are just beginning to come to grips with the scale and the depth of the problem. That's encouraging, but know this. We do better when you do better. I'd urge you to keep that in mind and to work with us proactively to find the right solution to a very constant and complaining challenge. I'll take a moment here to stress that what this hearing is and is not about. This isn't about relitigating the 2016 U.S. presidential election. This isn't about who won or who lost. This is about national security. This is about corporate responsibility. And this is about the deliberative and multifaceted manipulation of the American people by agents of a hostile foreign power. I'll say it again. Agents of a hostile foreign power reached into the United States using our own social media platforms and conducted an information operation intended to divide our society along issues like race, immigration, and Second Amendment rights. What's even more galling is that to tear us apart, they're using social media platforms Americans invented in connection with the First Amendment freedoms that define an open and democratic society. While it's shocking to think that foreign actors use the social networking and communications mediums that are so central to our lives today in an effort to interfere with the core of our democracy, what is even more troubling is the likelihood that these platforms are still being used today to spread lies, provoke conflict, and drive Americans apart. Your three companies have developed platforms that have tremendous reach and therefore tremendous influence. That reach and influence is enabled by the enormous amount of data you collect on your users and their activities. The American people now need to understand how Russia used that information and what you're doing to protect them. Your actions need to catch up to your responsibilities. We have a lot to get to this morning. I'm going to stop here. Again, I want to thank each of our briefers, our witnesses today, and I turn to the Vice Chairman for any comments he might have.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and let me also express our concern and thoughts about the tragedy yesterday in New York. Let me get right at it. In the age of social media, you can't afford to waste too much time, or for that matter, too many characters, in getting the point across. So I'll get straight to the bottom line. Russian operatives are attempting to infiltrate and manipulate American social media to hijack the national conversation and to make Americans angry, to set us against ourselves, and at their most basic, to undermine our democracy. They did it during the 2016 U.S. presidential campaign. They are still doing it now, and not one of us is doing enough to stop us. That's why we're here today. In many ways, the threat is not new. Russians have been conducting information warfare for decades. But what is new is the advent of social media tools with the power to magnify propaganda and fake news on a scale that was unimaginable back in the days of the Berlin Wall. Today's tools, in many ways, seem almost purpose-built for Russian disinformation techniques. Russia's playbook is simple but formidable. It works like this. First, disinformation agents set up thousands of fake accounts, groups, and pages across a wide array of platforms. These fake accounts populate content on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, Reddit, LinkedIn, and many other platforms. Each of these fake accounts spend literally months developing networks of real people to follow and like their content, boosted by tools like paid ads and automated bots. Most of the real-life followers have no idea that they were caught up in these webs. These networks are later utilized to push an array of disinformation, including stolen emails, state-led propaganda like RT News and Sputnik, fake news, and divisive content. The goal is pretty simple, is to get this so-called news into the news feeds of many potentially receptive Americans and to covertly and subtly push those Americans in the directions the Kremlin wants to go. As someone who deeply respects the tech industry and who was involved in that industry for more than 20 years, it's taken me quite a bit of time, and I'm still learning, to truly understand the nature of this threat. Even I struggle to keep up with the language and the mechanics, the difference between bots, trolls, and fake accounts, how they generate likes, tweets, and shares, and how all these players and actions are combined into an online ecosystem. What is clear, however, is that this playbook offers a tremendous bang for the disinformation buck. With just a small amount of money, adversaries use hackers to steal and weaponize data, trolls to craft disinformation, fake accounts to build networks, bots to drive traffic, and ads to target new audiences. They can force propaganda into the mainstream and wreak havoc on our online discourse. And if you look back at the results, it's a pretty good return on investment. So where do we go from here? I believe it will take all of us, you, some of the platform companies, the United States government, and the American people to deal with this new and evolving threat. The social media and innovative tools each of you have developed have changed our world for the better. You've transformed the way we do everything from shopping for groceries to growing small businesses. But Russia's actions are further exposing the dark underbelly of the ecosystem you have created. And there is no doubt that their successful campaign will be replicated by other adversaries, both nation-states and terrorists that wish to do harm to democracies around the globe. This is not a unique American phenomenon. As such, each of you here today needs to commit more resources to identifying bad actors and, when possible, preventing them from abusing our social media ecosystem. Thanks in part to pressure from this committee, each company has uncovered, I believe, only some of the evidence of the ways Russians exploited their platforms during the 2016 election. For Facebook, much of the attention has been focused on the paid ads that Russian trolls targeted to Americans. However, these ads are just the tip of a very large iceberg. The real story is the amount of misinformation and divisive content that was pushed for free on Russian-backed pages, which was then spread widely on news feeds of tens of millions of Americans. According to the data Facebook has provided, 120 Russian-backed pages built a network of over 3.3 million people. From these now suspended pages, 80,000 organic unpaid posts reached an estimated 126 million real people, more than a third of the population. This is an astonishing reach from just one group in St. Petersburg. And I doubt that the so-called Internet Research Agency in St. Petersburg represents the only Russian trolls out there. Facebook has more work to do to see how deep this goes, including into the reach that we've just found in the last 48 hours of information you provided of IRA-backed Instagram posts, which again, if we just take for an example, 80,000 posts from IRA-based trolls on Facebook, 120,000 pieces of content on Instagram, and we don't even have the data on how much that content reached. The anonymity provided by Twitter and the speed by which it shares news makes it an ideal tool to spread disinformation. According to one study, during the 2016 campaign, junk news actually outperformed real news in some battleground states leading up to Election Day. Another study found that bots generated 1 out of every 5 political messages posted on Twitter over the entire presidential campaign. I'm concerned, sir, that Twitter seems to be vastly underestimating the number of fake accounts and bots pushing disinformation. Independent researchers, people who've testified before this committee, have estimated that up to 15% of active Twitter accounts, or potentially 45 million plus accounts, are fake or automated. Despite evidence of significant incursion and outreach from researchers, Twitter has to date only uncovered a small piece of that activity. Although I will acknowledge that in the last few days, your numbers have gone from about 200 accounts to over 2,700 accounts, and again, I believe there's more to be done. Google search algorithms continue to have problems in surfacing fake news or propaganda. Though we can't necessarily attribute to Russian efforts, false stories and unsubstantiated rumors were elevated on Google search during the recent mass shootings in Las Vegas. Meanwhile, YouTube has become RT's go-to platform. Google has now uncovered 1,100 videos associated with this Russian campaign. Much more of your content was likely spread through other platforms. But it's not just the platforms that need to do more. The United States government has thus far proven incapable of meeting this 21st century challenge. Unfortunately, I believe this effort is suffering in part because of lack of leadership at the top. We have a president who remains unwilling to acknowledge the threat that Russia poses to our democracy. President Trump should stop actively delegitimizing American journalism and acknowledge and address this very real threat posed by Russian propaganda. I believe that Congress, too, must do more. We need to recognize that current law was not built to address these threats. I partnered with Senators Klobuchar and McCain on what I believe is the most light-touch legislative approach, which I hope all my colleagues on this panel will review. The Honest Ads Act is a national security bill intended to protect our elections from the foreign interference we all want to avoid. Finally, but perhaps most importantly, the American people also need to be aware of what is happening to our news feeds. We all need to take a more discerning approach to what we are reading and sharing and who we're connecting with online. We need to recognize the person at the other end of that Facebook or Twitter argument may not be a real person at all. The fact is that this Russian weapon has already proved its success and cost effectiveness. We can be assured that other adversaries, including foreign intelligence operatives and potentially terrorist organizations, have read this playbook and are already taking action. It's why we collectively must act. To our witnesses today, I hope you will detail what we saw in the last election, and most importantly, tell us what steps you will undertake for us to get ready for the next one. We welcome your participation and encourage your commitment to addressing this shared responsibility. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Senator Warner. I'd like to notify members we will have 7-minute rounds today by seniority. Gentlemen, if I could ask you to please stand and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Please be seated. Ms. Stretch, we're going to recognize you, then Mr. Edgett, then Mr. Walker. Ms. Stretch, the floor is yours.
Chairman Burr, Vice Chairman Warner, and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for this opportunity to appear before you today. My name is Colin Stretch, and since July 2013, I've served as the General Counsel of Facebook. We appreciate this committee's hard work to investigate Russian interference in the 2016 election. At Facebook, our mission is to create technology that gives people the power to build community and bring the world closer together. We are proud that each of you uses Facebook to connect with your constituents, and we understand that the people you represent expect authentic experiences when they come to our platform to share and connect. We also believe that we have an important role to play in the democratic process and a responsibility to protect it on our platform. That's why we take what's happened on Facebook so seriously. The foreign interference we saw during the 2016 election is reprehensible. That foreign actors hiding behind fake accounts abused our platform and other internet services to try to sow division and discord and to try to undermine our election process is directly contrary to our values and everything we stand for. Our goal at Facebook is to bring people closer together. These foreign actors sought to drive people apart. In our investigation, which continues to this day, we have found that these actors used fake accounts to place ads on Facebook and Instagram that reached millions of Americans over a 2-year period, and that those ads were used to promote pages, which in turn posted more content. People shared these posts, spreading them still further. Many of these ads and posts are inflammatory. Some are downright offensive. We know that much of this content is particularly hurtful to members of the Facebook community that engaged with this content believing it was authentic. People should believe content on Facebook is authentic, and should not have to worry that they are being exploited in a cynical effort to prey on painful fault lines in our society in order to inflame discourse in this country. In aggregate, the ads and posts we are here today to discuss were a very small fraction of the overall content on Facebook, but any amount is too much. All of these accounts and pages violated our policies, and we removed them. Going forward, we are making significant investments. We're hiring more ad reviewers, doubling or more our security engineering efforts, putting in place tighter ad content restrictions, launching new tools to improve ad transparency, and requiring documentation from political ad buyers. We're building artificial intelligence to help locate more banned content and bad actors. We're working more closely with industry to share information on how to identify and prevent threats so that we can all respond faster and more effectively. And we're expanding our efforts to work more closely with law enforcement. We know bad actors aren't going to stop their efforts. We know we'll all have to keep learning and improving to stay ahead of them. We also know we can't do this alone. That's why I want to thank you for this investigation. We look forward to the conclusions you will ultimately share with the American public, and I look forward to your questions.
Mr. Edge, the floor is yours.
Chairman Burr, Vice Chairman Warner, and members of this committee. Twitter understands the importance of the committee's inquiry into Russia's interference in the 2016 election, and we appreciate the opportunity to appear here today. The events underlying this hearing have been deeply concerning to our company and the broader Twitter community. We are committed to providing a service that fosters and facilitates free and open democratic debate and that promotes positive change in the world. We are troubled by reports that the power of Twitter was misused by a foreign actor for the purpose of influencing the U.S. presidential election and undermining public faith in the democratic process. The abuse of our platform to attempt state-sponsored manipulation of elections is a new challenge for us, and one we are determined to meet. Today, we intend to show the committee how serious we are about addressing this new threat by addressing the work we are doing to understand what happened and to ensure that it does not happen again. At the time of the 2016 election, we observed and acted on instances of automated and malicious activity. As we learned more about the scope of the broader problem, we resolved to strengthen our systems going forward. Elections continue all the time, so our first priority was to do all we could to block and remove malicious activity from interfering with our users' experience. We created dedicated teams within Twitter to enhance the quality of information our users see and to block malicious activity whenever and wherever we find it. Those teams continue to work every day to ensure Twitter remains a safe, open, transparent, and positive platform. We have also launched a retrospective review to find Russian efforts to influence the 2016 election through automation, coordinated activity, and advertising. While that review is still underway, we have made the decision to review and share what we know today in the interest of transparency and out of appreciation for the urgency of this matter. We do so recognizing that our findings may be supplemented as we continue to work with the committee staff and other companies, discover more facts, and gain a greater understanding of these events. My written testimony details the methodology and current findings of our retrospective review in detail. We studied tweets from the period September 1st to November 15th, 2016. During that time, we did find automated and coordinated activity of interest. We determined that the number of accounts we could link to Russia and that were tweeting election-related content was comparatively small, about 1/100% of total Twitter accounts at the time we studied. 1/3 of 1% of the election-related tweets people saw came from Russian-linked automated accounts. We did, however, observe instances where Russian-linked activity was more pronounced and have uncovered more accounts linked to the Russian-based Internet Research Agency as a result of our review. We have also determined that advertising by Russia Today and 7 small accounts was related to the election and violated either the policies in effect at the time or that have since been implemented. We have banned all of those users as advertisers, and we will donate that revenue to academic research into the use of Twitter during elections and for civic engagement. We are making meaningful improvements based on our findings. Last week, we announced industry-leading changes to our advertising policies that will help protect our platform from unwanted content. We are also enhancing our safety systems, sharpening our tools for stopping malicious activity, and increasing transparency to promote public understanding of all of these areas. Our work on these challenges will continue for as long as malicious actors seek to abuse our system and will need to evolve to stay ahead of new tactics. We have heard concerns about Russia's actors' use of Twitter to disrupt the 2016 election and about our commitment to addressing that issue. Twitter believes that any activity of that kind, regardless of magnitude, is unacceptable, and we agree that we must do better to prevent it. We hope that our appearance today and the description of the work we have undertaken demonstrates our commitment to working with you, our industry partners, and other stakeholders to ensure that the experience of 2016 never happens again. Cooperation to combat this challenge is essential. We cannot defeat this evolving shared threat alone. As with most technology-based threats, the best approach is to combine information and ideas to increase our collective knowledge. Working with the broader community, we will continue to test, to learn, to share, and to improve so that our product remains effective and safe. I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Edgett. Mr. Walker, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Chairman Burr, Vice Chairman Warner, members of the committee, for the opportunity to speak with you today. My name is Kent Walker. I'm Senior Vice President and General Counsel at Google. I oversee our legal, our policy, our trust and safety, and our Google.org teams. I've worked at the intersection of technology, security, and the law for over 25 years, starting my career as an Assistant U.S. Attorney for the U.S. Department of Justice, focused on technology crimes. Let me start my conversation with you today by joining the earlier comments, acknowledging the victims and the families of the awful attack in New York yesterday. As a New York employer, we know how strong and tough New Yorkers are, and we look forward to doing anything we can to help. Turning to the issues before the committee today, Google believes that we have a responsibility to prevent the misuse of our platforms, and we take that very seriously. Google was founded with a mission of organizing the world's information and making it universally accessible and useful. The abuse of the tools and platforms we build is antithetical to that mission. Google is deeply concerned about attempts to undermine the democratic elections. We are committed to working with Congress, law enforcement, others in our industry, and the NGO community to strengthen protections around elections, to ensure the security of users, and to help combat disinformation. We recognize the importance of this committee's mandate, and we appreciate the opportunity to share information and talk about solutions. Of course, disinformation and propaganda campaigns aren't new and have involved many types of media and publications over the years. And for many years, we've seen attempts to interfere with our online platforms. We take these threats very seriously. We've built industry-leading security systems, and we've put those tools into our consumer products as well. Back in 2007, we launched the first version of our Safe Browsing tool, which helps protect users from phishing, malware, and other attacks. Today, Safe Browsing is used on more than 3 billion devices worldwide. If we suspect that users are subject to government-sponsored attacks, we warn them about that. And last month, we launched our Advanced Protection Program, which helps protect those at greatest risk of attack, like journalists, business leaders, and politicians. We face motivated and resourceful attackers, and we are continually evolving our tools to stay ahead of ever-changing threats. Our tools don't just protect our physical and network security, but they also detect and prevent attempts to manipulate our systems. On Google News, for example, we use fact-check labels to help users spot fake news. For Google Search, we have updated our quality guidelines and evaluations to help surface more authoritative content from the web. We've updated our advertising guidelines as well to prohibit ads on sites that misrepresent themselves. And on YouTube, we employ a sophisticated spam and security breach detection system designed to detect anomalous behavior and catch people trying to inflate view counts of videos or numbers of subscribers. And as threats evolve, we will continually adapt in order to understand and prevent new attempts to misuse our platforms. With respect to the committee's work on the 2016 election, we've looked across our products to understand whether government-backed entities were using our products to disseminate information in order to interfere with the U.S. election. While we did find some deceptive activities on our platform associated with suspected government-backed accounts, that activity appears to have been relatively limited. Of course, any activity like this is more than we would like to see. We've provided the relevant information to the committee, have issued a public summary of the results of our review, and we will continue to cooperate with the committee's investigation. Going forward, we will continue to expand our use of cutting-edge technology to protect our users, and we'll continue working with governments to ensure that our platforms aren't abused. We will also be making political advertising more transparent, easier for users to understand, and even more secure. In 2018, we'll release a transparency report showing data about who is buying election ads on our platform and how much money is being spent. We'll pair that transparency report with a database available for public research of election and ad content across our ads products. We're also going to make it easier for users to understand who bought the election ads they see on our networks. Going forward, users will be able to easily find the name of any advertiser running an election ad on Search, YouTube, or the Google Display Network through an icon on the ad. We'll continue enhancing our existing safeguards to ensure that we permit only U.S. nationals to buy U.S. election ads. We already tightly restrict which advertisers can serve ads to audiences based on political leanings. Moving forward, we'll go further by verifying the identity of anyone who wants to run an election ad or use our political interest-based tools and confirming that that person is permitted to run that ad. We certainly can't do this alone. We'll continue to work with other companies to better protect the collective digital ecosystem, and even as we take our own steps, we remain open to working on legislation that promotes electoral transparency. Moreover, our commitment to addressing these issues extends beyond our services. We've offered in-person briefings and introduced a suite of digital tools designed to help election websites and political campaigns protect themselves from phishing, unauthorized account access, and other digital attacks. We're also increasing our longstanding support for the bipartisan Defending Digital Democracy project. Let me conclude by recognizing the importance of the work of this committee. Our users, advertisers, and creators must be able to trust in their security and safety. We share the goal of identifying bad actors who have attempted to interfere with our systems and abuse the electoral process. We look forward to continued cooperation, both with the members of this committee and with our fellow companies, to provide access to tools that help citizens express themselves while avoiding abuses that undercut the integrity of elections. Thank you again for the opportunity to tell you about our ongoing efforts. We look forward to our continuing work with Congress on these important issues, and we're happy to answer any questions you might have.
Mr. Walker, thank you for your testimony. Chair would recognize himself and share with members that I'm going to talk about one specific ad. It's not going to count to my 7 minutes, and the Vice Chairman is going to do the same at the beginning of his, sort of set the stage for much of what we'll talk about today. As an example, I'd like to highlight one specific case with real-world implications involving two different Facebook groups, both of which are associated with the Russian Internet Research Agency. You'll see the first board that is up. First group's called The Heart of Texas, with over 250,000 followers. This account promoted pro-Texas causes and included posts many would characterize as anti-immigration or anti-Muslim. The tagline for this group is referenced in the top left-hand corner of the first chart is Texas, homeland of guns, barbecue, and your heart, with the words time to secede emboldened on the Texas flag. Turning to the second group, which is in the bottom right hand, is called the United Muslims of America, with over 328,000 followers. This account claimed to be pro-Islamic themes. The tagline for this group is referenced in the bottom right corner of the first chart is I'm a Muslim and I'm proud. So if I could have the second board up. The Heart of Texas group created a public event on Facebook to occur at noon, May 21st, 2016, at the Islamic Center in Houston, Texas, to stop, quote, to stop the Islamization of Texas, unquote. The same group then placed an advertisement on Facebook to promote their event with over 12,000 people viewed. Turning to the second group, it's called the United Muslims of America, with over 328,000 followers. This account claimed to push pro-Islamic themes. The tagline for this group is referenced at the bottom, I'm Muslim and I'm proud. The United Muslims of America subsequently created an event on Facebook to occur at noon, May 21st, 2016, at the Islamic Center in Houston, Texas, to, I quote, save Islamic knowledge. Same time, same place as the Heart of Texas event. The group then placed an advertisement targeting people in Houston, Texas area to promote their event to support the Islamic Center. More than 2,700 people viewed this ad. Now, if I could have the third board. On May 21st, 2016, local news captured the events as they unfolded, reporting on the protest staged by the Heart of Texas group and resulting counter-protest. The pictures you see on the third board are from the streets in front of the Islamic Center in Houston, Texas. What neither side could have known is that Russia trolls were encouraging both sides to battle in the streets and create division between real Americans. Ironically, one person who attended stated, "The Heart of Texas promoted this event, but we didn't see one of them." We now know why. It's hard to attend an event in Houston, Texas, when you're trolling from a site in St. Petersburg, Russia. Establishing these two competing groups, paying for the ads, and causing this disruptive event in Houston cost Russia about $200. And Mr. Stretch, you commented yesterday that your company's goal is bringing people together. In this case, people were brought together to foment conflict, and Facebook enabled that event to happen. I would say that Facebook has failed their goal. From a computer in St. Petersburg, Russia, these operators can create and promote events anywhere in the United States and attempt to tear apart our society. I'm certain that our adversaries are learning from the Russian activities and even watching us today. Simply put, you must do better to protect the American people and, frankly, all of your users from this kind of manipulation. My time can start now. I have one simple question, yes or no, from each of you. I'll start with Mr. Stretch and work my way to your left. The Federal Election Campaign Act prohibits any foreign national from spending funds in connection with any federal, state, or local elections in the United States. Doesn't this law prohibit your publication of this content? Mr. Stretch?
Prohibit publication of the content we've seen?
Does FEC law apply to Facebook?
Certainly, FEC law, yes, applies
It
to.
prohibits foreign dollars influence an election.
It prohibits foreign actors from using really any medium, including Facebook, to influence a U.S. election.
So FEC law applies to Facebook.
Yes, it does.
Mr. Edgett?
It applies to Twitter as well.
Applies to Twitter. Mr. Walker?
Yes, sir.
Great. The prevalence of social media use among military members who spend so much time outside the country, deployed, away from friends, away from family, seems a likely target for foreign intelligence agencies who want to collect details on U.S. force movements, deployments, and other sensitive insight. Do you monitor your platforms for indications that your users in the U.S. military are targeted in any way? Mr. Stretch?
Senator, yes, and I would say that sort of security work really falls into the traditional cybersecurity work that we've long been focused on. We've had a threat intelligence team for years now that has been focused on tracking foreign actors, and it's exactly that sort of threat that we believe has historically been an area of focus for our adversaries and likewise an area of focus for us on the defensive side.
Mr. Edgett?
Yeah, similar to Mr. Stretch, we've been focused on that type of threat for years. We're also focused on education on the other side and helping law enforcement and military personnel understand how to use Twitter and both its benefits and its risks.
Mr. Walker?
We've been looking at cyber espionage for some years, and so this is all in focus. Because we're not a social network, we may not have as much visibility as to whether individual users of our service are veterans or not, but that would certainly be an area of concern.
These questions are for Facebook, Mr. Stretch. In a blog published September 6, 2017, Alex Stamis, Facebook's chief security officer, wrote that the company had discovered about 3,000 political ads that were paid for through 470 fake accounts and pages that likely operated out of Russia. Facebook shut down these accounts on the grounds that they were inauthentic. Had these accounts not violated Facebook's prohibition against fake accounts, would they have been shut down?
Senator, many of them would have, because many of them violated other policies related to the type of content that's permitted on the platform. The authenticity issue is the key. Referring to the content you surfaced earlier, it's pains us as a company, it pains me personally to see that that our platform was abused in this way. People in this country care deeply about issues of public concern, and it's one of the strengths of our country that people are so willing to speak freely about them. The fact that foreign actors were able to use our platform to exploit that openness is a deeply painful lesson for us, and one we're focused on learning from going forward.
Does it trouble you that it took this committee to get you to look at the authentic nature of the users and the content?
Senator, we are certainly troubled, I'd say more than troubled, by the evidence of abuse of our platform during 2016, and we're certainly grateful for the committee's investigation and the attention you're bringing to this issue. We think it's very important. We do believe that it's a larger issue than any one company, and we believe that going forward there are opportunities not just for us to do better, but for us to work together to make sure we're all addressing this threat appropriately.
What characteristics would indicate that an account or page is likely operated out of Russia?
There are a number of characteristics that can signal potential location. The most obvious one that is typically the most reliable is location information that's transmitted by the user's browser when they access Facebook. It's also the most easily manipulable. There are many other signals that similarly will suggest location, but because of the way the internet is architected, can also be faked. Our job is to look not just for the signals that are in plain sight, but understand how they can be manipulated and look for patterns of activity that reveal efforts to abuse our platform that are shrouded both geographically and in other ways.
Mr. Edgett, your vice president at Twitter stated that Twitter's expanding its team and resources and building new tools and processes to combat automated Twitter accounts or bots. What is Twitter's process for identifying a bot?
We have a lot of data behind sort of the things you see on Twitter that looks at the activity of an account. And remember, there are hundreds of millions of accounts. The activity of account as it relates to other accounts. So as you or I, Senator, tweet, our activity looks pretty normal. As an automated account tweets thousands of times an hour or logs in thousands of times a day, that looks pretty suspicious. So our technology is looking for that anomaly that differentiates sort of normal accounts from automated accounts. But spammers and bad actors are getting better at making themselves look more real.
So what percentage of accounts on Twitter are actually bots and not real people?
So we do a monthly audit of this and investigation, and determined that for years, less than 5% of our accounts are false accounts or spam.
What happens to accounts on Twitter that are suspended by Twitter? Is there an indefinite status?
Once we suspend an account, especially an automated account, they're typically permanently banned from the platform. And we also do work to link those accounts with new accounts that may pop up. So the more we investigate and look into this and build the web of information around the signals we're seeing from these accounts, the better we get at linking those accounts and stopping them before they get on the platform.
My time has expired, but I'm going to ask you to submit in writing for the record Twitter's assessment of why independent assessments of the number of bots on Twitter consistently, are higher than the 5% that you've stated today, if you would provide that for the record.
Happy to provide that for the record and address it today.
Vice Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also want to demonstrate, but I'd also, as we're getting ready, we have had testimony before this committee from a representative of NATO that fake and bot accounts on Twitter are more in the 12 to 15% account. A vast number of research studies, 320 million active Twitter accounts. Even if you assume 10%, you're still talking 30+ million potential accounts that could be misused and abused. If we could put up the chart here, this is another example of how people are kind of lured in. First ad is an ad that is pretty benign. It's obviously targeted towards Christians. It's a Army of Jesus Facebook ad. 217,000 followers. You like that page, and here's what happens. You would get a series of, for the most part, relatively benign Bible quotes or other items. This ad appeared in October of 16, and late October, early November, suddenly this benign site, in addition to your Bible quotes, suddenly we're getting these other posts, not paid ads, but posts from this organization. This message, obviously the bottom one would have gone to the 217,000 followers. We have no idea how many times it was liked or shared with other individuals. Again, we've got two different examples of the type of tools, how people lure people in, and then once they're lured into what they think is a pro-Texas or pro-Muslim or here pro-Jesus account, and then they are manipulated by foreign actors and foreign agents. Go ahead and start my time. First of all, I hear all your words, but I have more than a little bit of frustration that many of us on this committee have been raising this issue since the beginning of this year. And our claims were frankly blown off by the leaderships of your companies, dismissed, said there's no possibility, nothing like this happening, nothing to see here. Bothers me, if you're really committed to trying to work with us to resolve this, that it took until this committee continually went at you, and it was July and early August when you made your first presentations. And candidly, your first presentations were less than sufficient and showed, in my mind, a lack of resources, a lack of commitment, and a lack of genuine effort. Candidly, your companies know more about Americans in many ways than the United States government does. And the idea that you had no idea of any of this was happening strains my credibility. So my first question is this, and I want a yes or no answer, not a filibuster. Will you commit to continue to work with this committee to provide additional information and additional documents as needed as we continue to explore this challenge and threat on a going forward basis? We go right down the line. Mr. Stretch?
Yes.
Mr. Stretch?
Absolutely.
Mr. Walker?
Absolutely.
Next. One of the things that I continue again, and I will commend you here, that from our friends at Facebook, you identified 470 accounts, 3,000 ads. And most of the work, at least it appears to me, from at least Twitter and Facebook, has all been derivative of that initial data dump. And again, this is a yes or no question. Do you believe that any of your companies have identified the full scope of Russian active measures on your platform? Yes or no?
Senator, our investigation continues. So I would have to say no, certainly not with certainty.
Mr. Edgett?
No, and we're still working on this.
Mr. Walker?
I believe we have done a comprehensive investigation, but as Mr. Stretch says, these are ongoing issues and we continue to investigate.
Let me start again with Facebook here. You've identified 470 accounts from one troll farm in St. Petersburg. There have been plenty of press reports of other troll farms in Russia. There have been reports of other activities that were Russian-controlled in Central Europe and Eastern Europe. In meetings with your leadership, as you became more aware of this problem, you aggressively promoted the fact, for example, that you took down 30,000 accounts around the French elections. Now, you say not all of those were Russian-related. Have you gone back and cross-checked those Russian-related accounts that you took down in France to see if any of those accounts were active in the American election?
Senator, the 30,000 accounts that we took down in...
The accounts that were related to Russian accounts that you took down, your leadership, in fact, bragged about how proactively you were in the French election process. Did you check those accounts to see if any of them were active in the American elections?
Senator, the system that ran to take down those accounts, which were fake accounts of really all type and for any purpose, is now active worldwide
Have
and is
you,
operated?
just please answer my question. Have you reviewed the accounts you took down in France that were Russian-related to see if they had played any role in the American election?
Senator, I apologize. I'm trying to answer the question.
Well, the answer is yes or no. I don't want a long explanation. I want to know, have you done, because I've been signaling this to you for some time. Yeah. We wanted to make sure that you would review those accounts. We wanted to make sure what the 470 accounts that paid for the 3,000 ads, you said these were all accounts except for one that were paid for in rubles. Did you even run those accounts to see if any of those accounts were paid for with dollars or euros or other currencies?
Senator, those... Let me try to state it
or no?
absolutely. So we have
Mr.
and we
Stretch,
continue.
yes or no?
Yes, we are looking and have looked at every possible indication of Russian activity in the 2016 election, and the investigation continues.
Sir,
that includes any evidence we've identified from those 38,000 accounts, as well as a number of
all those accounts have been run. That database has been run to see if any of those accounts were active in the United States.
I will have to come back to you on that, Senator.
Sir, we've had this hearing scheduled for months. I find your answer very, very disappointing. On the question of, we just discovered, and I appreciate this, you had 80,000 views in terms of Russian views on Facebook. We now discover in the last 48 hours, 120,000 Russian-based posts on Instagram. Have you done any of the similar analysis on those 120,000 posts? We know the 80,000 ended up reaching 126 million Americans. Have you done that same analysis on the 120,000 posts on Instagram?
Yes, Senator, we have.
And how many Americans did those touch?
The data on Instagram is not as complete, but the data that we do have indicates that beginning in October of 2016, those Instagram posts reached an additional 16 million people, in addition to the 126 million people that we identify.
So now we're seeing the Russian activities roughly at 150 million plus Americans without knowing how many times they were reshared.
If I can add, the time period prior to October 16th where our data is less reliable would yield an incremental 4 million. So all told, that gets you to approximately a little less than 150 million. That's correct, Senator.
On the Twitter account, there was one activity, and this was not something that happened during 2016. Again, I agree with the chairman. We're not here to relitigate 2016. But there was a fake Tennessee Republican account, 10 GOP. The irony was this account had 154,000 followers. The real Tennessee GOP party had 13,400 followers, I believe, based on your numbers. I find very interesting, there have been some people who've said, well, people should be able to spot these fake accounts. Well, if they're able to spot these fake accounts, you had the president's communications director retweeting this account, Kellyanne Conway. You had the president's son, Donald Trump Jr., retweeting this account. My question is, why did it take so long to take this down when the Tennessee Republican Party was asking you repeatedly?
Yeah, that was an absolute miss, and we've gotten better since. We've refined our policies around impersonation and parody accounts.
Let me just close with this. My time's about up. We've looked on this subject on political information and disinformation, but the same way that these bots and trolls and click farms and fake pages, groups, algorithm gaming can be used in politics, these same tools can and have been used, I believe, to assist financial frauds around stock schemes. I think there is a lot of this activity in broad-based digital advertising. I think we've seen some of this in schemes to sell counterfeit prescription drugs, as well as the ability to encourage folks to download malware. I believe this is a real challenge, and to get this right, we're going to need your ongoing cooperation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Risch.
Thank you. Gentlemen, thank you for coming today. By now, it's probably pretty obvious to everyone that this committee has spent lots and lots and lots of time on this, both as it relates to the election and on these kinds of things not related to the political process here in the country. But we have spent a lot of time, and I think have been able to reach some conclusions on this. No one's exempt. I come from a state that's a lot smaller, Idaho. They tried to do in Idaho exactly what was done in Texas, where they tried to promote a meeting where they had two conflicting sides, and no one showed up. So it wasn't as there was no success in Texas. And in Idaho, just like Texas, it had absolutely nothing to do with the 2016 presidential election. It was simply a cultural type of acrimony that they were attempting to promote. The chairman talked about the news reports that allege that the Russians use social media to promote a particular candidate, and may even, some of those suggest that they changed the result of the election. But this whole thing goes a lot deeper than that. One of the things we've discovered, and I think you probably are aware of this, that you can't look at those ads and say, okay, they were all promoting one particular candidate. There were ads going both ways, for and against both candidates by the Russians. And that's, I'm going to get back to that in just a second. But the other thing that I think that we've come to the conclusion on, and very early, is the U.S. isn't the only ones that have suffered from this. The Europeans, France, Austria, Germany, just amongst others, have suffered from the exact same thing, and that is Russian attempted interference with their domestic affairs. I put a section in the sanctions bill, the Iran-Russia-North Korea sanctions bill, that requires the executive branch to do a study on this, on the effect in Europe, because they were much more overt in Europe than they were here. Most of the work they did here was covert, and probably because in European countries there is actually a fair amount of Russian sympathy where they can mobilize these people. Not so much here in the United States. Obviously some, but not nearly what there is there. So I want to come at this from a little different perspective. The 2016 elections got a lot of the politicians riled up because it went after the political process. But my conclusion is, and I think most people here would agree with me, that, and indeed Senator Warner referred to this, that this is a lot deeper than just the elections. There are a lot of things that the Russians are trying to do, and not just inject themselves into the electoral process. It seems to me that after you step back and look at this and say, what's going on here? What is the motivation? What are they doing? I always look at something from an objective standpoint. What is their objective? What are they trying to accomplish? And you walk away from it just shaking your head, because we Americans don't think the same way they think about promoting our country. So the conclusion I've reached is that the Russians are doing what they've done all along, long before your technology even existed, and that is trying to sow discord, simply trying to sow discord. And so my question to each of you is, have you tried to analyze what the Russians were trying to accomplish here, not only in the 2016 elections, but in these other kinds of ads with the discord? Or your personal views on that, whether they've, what they're trying to accomplish. Mr. Stretch?
Senator, it's very difficult for us to ascribe motive. It's, I think, why this committee's work is so important. We've tried to provide you as much information as we can, and we hope that with your visibility into other sources of information, you will be able to help the American people have a better assessment of what the motive is. We think that'll help all of us do better to prevent this sort of activity in the future.
Would you agree with me that the motive isn't obvious here, given the difference in the way they handle these things?
Yes, I would agree with that.
Yeah. Mr. Agent?
I would agree with that as well. I mean, based on what we've seen, the advertisements from Russia today, the types of content that was being put out by the IRA, also the automated account content, looks as if it's merely focused on divisiveness. But we're still investigating this issue and look forward to working with this committee to help put the whole picture together.
Mr. Walker?
The large majority of the material we saw was on the socially divisive side rather than direct electoral advocacy, yes.
And that has really been the focus of the media, that, oh, this was all about the 2016 election. You agree with me that this is much broader than that and is, as you say, divisive, aimed at divisiveness or aimed at discord. Would you all agree with that?
Yeah, and that's a problem we're trying to tackle every day.
Mr. Stretch, you agree with that?
Yes, I would agree, and note that the time period in question and the activity we saw even continued after the election.
Mr. Walker?
That seems reasonable. Hard for us to know, and again, ultimately for the committee to
I
decide.
appreciate that, and as I said, my view of this is a whole lot broader than simply the 2016 election. Mr. Walker, I have a specific question for you. I think I heard you say that you're enacting a policy where only a U.S. national can buy an election ad. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. What about other countries? Obviously, you operate on places other than the United States. Can a U.S. national buy an ad, for instance, for French or German or Austrian campaign?
I haven't studied the laws of individual countries, but we are not confining our work to the U.S. We are looking at other elections around the world to make sure that we do whatever we can to minimize electoral interference.
So what you're going to do is try to confine people to their own elections in their own countries? Is that pretty much your...
Certainly that's the case for the United States and any other country around the world where that's the law. That's true, yes.
I think that's going to be a big challenge for you, but good luck, and I wish you well in that endeavor. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Feinstein.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I sat in on the judiciary hearing yesterday. It was a subcommittee hearing, but was able to ask some questions. And I want to just make a personal comment, because I've been very proud, and I know Senator Harris is as well, to represent this tech community from California. But I must say, I don't think you get it. I think the fact that you're general counsels, you defend your company, that what we're talking about is a cataclysmic change. What we're talking about is the beginning of cyber warfare. What we're talking about is a major foreign power with the sophistication and ability to involve themselves in a presidential election and sow conflict and discontent all over this country. We are not going to go away, gentlemen. And this is a very big deal. I went home last night with profound disappointment. I asked specific questions. I got vague answers. And that just won't do. You have a huge problem on your hands. And the United States is going to be the first of the countries to bring it to your attention, and others are going to follow, I'm sure, because you bear this responsibility. You've created these platforms, and now they are being misused. And you have to be the ones to do something about it, or we will. And this committee is intelligence. It's different from yesterday. So they're privy to different facts, and they're very potent facts. Let me go back to a couple of questions that I asked yesterday. Mr. Edgett, yesterday you testified that Twitter only began to remove voter suppression posts that told people they could vote by texting or tweeting after you found out about them from other Twitter users. These were illegal tweets. Waiting for users to alert Twitter isn't sufficient. I'll give you another chance. What is Twitter doing to proactively identify illegal voter suppression tweets?
Thank you for letting me address that. We're constantly improving, not only on our technology around automated accounts that are trying to amplify these types of messages.
That's not enough.
But also on putting people and technology on the content and the behavior, and trying to make our workflows, our reporting flows more efficient, and using artificial intelligence to prioritize things like the illegal voter suppression ads and other things that we see on the platform, and taking those down faster. We are getting better, but this is a problem that we are focused on getting better at every day.
Well, you have to find a way to prevent them from going up.
That's right, and that's why we
That's
tend to...
the problem.
Right, that's why we tend to focus on behavior behind the accounts to know before the content goes up. We've seen We've seen great strides in other areas not related to that, and so we're trying to take that same solution to this problem set.
Okay, Mr. Walker, I asked your colleague yesterday why Google didn't immediately revoke Russia Today's preferred status after the intelligence community determined and publicly stated that RT was a part of the Russian government's efforts to interfere in our election. Mr. Salgado told me that RT only lost its preferred status because of a, quote, drop in viewership, end quote, not because it was part of the Kremlin's propaganda machine. This response was deeply troubling and frankly did not answer my question. So here it is again. Why didn't Google take any action regarding RT after the intelligence community assessment came out in January of 2017? I'm sorry, your mic isn't on.
Senator, let me start by responding to your initial comments to assure you we take this and have taken this issue very seriously. The question of cyber espionage is one that we have been working on for some years, publicly and privately, working with other companies and working on our own to identify some of these threats. This is one manifestation of that, but not the only one. With regard to RT, we recognize the concerns that have been expressed about RT and concerns about its slanted coverage. This is, of course, a question that goes beyond the internet. RT is covered, its channel is on major cable television stations, on satellite television stations. Its advertising appears in newspapers, magazines, airports. It's run in hotels in pretty much every city in the United States. We have carefully reviewed the content of RT to see that it complies with the policies that we have against hate speech, incitement to violence, etc. So far, we have not found violations, but we continue to look. Beyond that, we think that the key to this area is transparency. That if Americans should have access to information from a wide variety of perspectives, but they should know what they're getting. And so we already, on Google, provide information about the government-funded nature of RT. We're looking at ways to expand that to YouTube and potentially other platforms.
Well, as you might guess, I'm really not satisfied with that. That's sort of been the trend of the testimony all along. I think we're in a different day now. We're at the beginning of what could be cyber war. And you all, as a policy matter, have to really take a look at that and what role you play. I think my time is almost up. Let me try one more. A British report recently concluded that social media platforms such as Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube fail to remove extremist material posted by banned jihadists and neo-Nazi groups, even when that material was reported. The source for this is the British Parliament's Home Affairs Select Committee. Last night, we saw a horrific attack on innocent people in New York by an individual who may have been radicalized online. We know one person who is Anwar al-Awlaki, 75,000 hits, the major radicalizer in the United States on the internet. I'm working on legislation to require tech companies to report known terrorist activity on their platforms to law enforcement and to provide law enforcement with civil injunction authority. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Feinstein. Senator Rubio.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. Mr. Stretch, I want to ask you, and it relates to all this in the following way, but let me work there. Guo Wenwei is a whistleblower and a critic of the Chinese government, and his Facebook account was blocked, and Facebook has informed us, and it's not publicly, that he violated terms of service. I think he published personal identifying information about individuals, and that violated the terms of service. So, and I understand that argument. My question, what I want to be clear is, was there any pressure from the Chinese government to block his account?
No, Senator. We reviewed a report on that account and analyzed it through regular channels using our regular procedures. The blocking was not of the account in its entirety, but I believe was of specific posts that violated our policy.
So you can testify today that you did not come under pressure from the Chinese government or any of its representatives or people working for them to block his account or to block whatever it is you blocked?
I want to make sure I'm being precise and clear. We did receive a report from representatives of the Chinese government about the account. We analyzed that report as we would any other and took action solely based on our policies.
Facebook is not allowed to operate in China. Is that correct? Is
That's
Facebook
correct.
blocked in China?
Our consumer services are blocked in China. That's correct.
Okay. There have been press reports that Facebook may have potentially developed software to suppress posts from appearing in people's news feeds in specific geographic areas. And the speculation is it's being done for the purposes of getting into the Chinese market. Is that accurate? Has Facebook developed software to suppress posts from appearing in people's news feeds in specific geographic areas?
Senator, as you know, we are blocked in China, so any software we have is certainly not operative there. We do have many instances where we have content reported to us from foreign governments that is illegal under the laws of those governments. So a great example of this is Holocaust denial in Germany, for example. And our position with respect to reports like that is if there is content that's visible in a country that violates local law and we're on specific notice of that content, we deploy what we call geo-blocking or IP blocking so that the content will not be visible in that country, but remains available on the
So, for example,
service.
criticizing a government is illegal in that country, you have the capability to block them from criticizing the government and thereby gaining entry into that country and being allowed to operate.
We have the capability to ensure that our service complies with local law. That's accurate. We take a very nuanced approach to reports of illegal content. We believe our mission is to enable people to share and connect, and we believe that political expression is at the core of what we provide. And so
What if political expression is illegal in the country?
So in the vast majority of cases where we are on notice of locally illegal content, it has nothing to do with political expression. It's things like blasphemy in parts of the world that are that prohibit blasphemy.
Yeah. We could probably do a whole hearing on that topic, but here's why that's related to what we're talking about today. Terms of service is what the reason why he was knocked off. All of you have terms of service. Is a foreign influence campaign a violation of the terms of service of any of the three companies represented here today? If you can prove that someone is doing it on behalf of a foreign government seeking to interfere in an election, does that violate your terms of service? Any of the three companies, in terms of being able to operate or post things, and particularly Twitter and Facebook?
Yeah, generally would violate a number. We don't have state-sponsored manipulation of elections as one of our rules, but generally the other types of rules like inflammatory ads content would take down most of these posts. So we don't outright ban it, but
Well, let me ask you this. I've read that you can buy a bot army from between $45 to $100. Is buying and if you can prove that someone's bought up and put together a bot army, would that be a violation of terms of service?
those would violate our terms of service around the use of automated accounts, and those are the things that we're catching every day. We're blocking 450,000 suspicious logins a day. We're challenging 4 million accounts every week to make sure that they're actually real people. But we have terms of service around.
I didn't get an answer on the Facebook. Is that a violation of terms of service to buy for a foreign influence campaign or to put together a bunch of fake ads and put them together?
That campaign violates our terms and our policies in a number of ways, and we do not permit automated means for accessing the site. So using the bots likewise would be a violation.
Okay. What about, you said, so if someone goes on and posts social security number and date of birth of an individual, that's a violation of terms of service, correct?
For Facebook, it is, yes.
I imagine for
It is,
all the
of
platforms.
course.
What about if someone goes online and posts classified information illegally obtained that threatens the lives of individuals or methods or potentially disrupts the ability to disrupt a plot that can endanger the lives of people? Is posting that online or posting that in one of your platforms a violation of terms of service? It happens sometimes. I don't know if you're aware of it, but they...
Yeah, we work with law enforcement all the time on matters like that and balance free speech rights, obviously, with those of Obviously, an imminent threat we would take very seriously and act on right away.
I guess my point is personal identifying information is illegal to post it, right? It threatens someone's identity. It's also illegal to steal and reveal classified information. And I'm just curious if that's also a violation of terms of service, since the fact it could have real-life implications on individuals who could be compromised because of that release. Do we have any evidence that Russian accounts uploaded U.S. voter registration data and used it in conjunction with custom audiences to target specific voters by name? Do any of you have any information that registered voter data was uploaded and used to customized advertising or messaging to individual voters?
We haven't seen evidence of that so far.
The same is true for Facebook.
And my last question is, the scope of this was not limited to 2016 or even the presidential race. As an example, I think with the help of some of the companies here, we've identified Being Patriotic, LGBT United, United Muslims of America, Stop AI, Heart of Texas, all were used to attack my campaign during the primary. What's interesting, though, is on the 3rd of July and on the 8th of August, after the primary, but when I chose to run for re-election, one of those, LGBT United, attacked again. So my point being, these operations, while we're talking about the 2016 presidential race, they're not limited to 2016, and they were not limited to the presidential race, and they continue to this day. They're much more widespread than one election. It is about our general political climate. Is that correct?
I would certainly agree with that statement, Senator.
Okay. Thank you.
Senator Wyden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With the current fascist leadership of Russia enthusiastically undermining our democracy, America must defend the values that made us great and aggressively confront this espionage and the enemies that sponsor it. The tools of the espionage range from political ads to issue ads, sock puppets to fictional news stories, and from rallies to protests to marches, all presented under false pretenses. While the Supreme Court has ruled that Congress may place some limits on strictly political advertising, the other activities I just mentioned are beyond the reach of government and government regulation in a free society. To fight back against this espionage, Americans have to rely on our marketplace of ideas and the institutions that support it. Gentlemen, today, you three represent those institutions. Now, you've discussed your response to these attacks, but it is self-evident in relation to the power your platforms now have. In the past election, you failed. And this is especially troubling because the same federal law that allowed your companies to grow and thrive, the Section 230 law, gives you absolute legal protection to take action against those who abuse your platforms to damage our democracy. The same algorithms that power your companies can be used to identify the behavior indicative of these attacks, including fake accounts and fake news stories, and identify the source of money purchasing your ads. Now, I'm of the view ads are a small part of a much bigger problem. Fake users posting stories on Facebook, videos on YouTube, links on Twitter can be used by foreign and domestic enemies to undermine our society. You need to stop paying lip service to shutting down bad actors using these accounts. You've got the power, and Congress has given you the legal protection to actually act and deal with this. So I want to start with a couple of quick yes and no questions. We can just go right down the row for the three of you. Mr. Walker, are you satisfied with your platform's response to foreign interference in the 2016 election? Yes or no? Just yes or no.
Yeah, we are constantly doing better.
The answer no?
We could have done more, but I think we are doing more today and have done more since the
I'll take that as a
election.
no. Mr. Edgett?
No, we need to do more.
Mr. Stretch?
Same is true.
Okay. Do you all have, and we'll start with you, Mr. Walker, the technical ability and resources to better respond to future misinformation campaigns? Yes or no?
Yes, the safe harbors and the Good Samaritan laws are important underpinnings for all of this, and we are doing more. We have done more to combat fake
Stretch,
news.
yes or no?
Yes.
Yes.
Stretch.
Yes, and I would add, though, that I do believe we need information sharing among industry as well as working with the government to enable us to do this effectively.
Gentlemen, specifically now, describe the changes you're going to pursue that respond to not just the ads, but the sock puppets, the hoaxes, and the confidence operations. We'd like to walk out of here knowing the changes you're going to support going forward. Mr. Walker.
Sure. Let me give you 4 on the ad side and 3 on the non-ad side.
Quickly.
Absolutely. The transparency report that we talked about for ads, an archive of content of all ads content that's available, icons that make information on the site available to users as to who sponsors an ad, and enhanced verification techniques. When it comes to non-ads material, fake news, we're improving our algorithms, our radar guidelines, and the signals we use. We're using fake news fact check labels to improve users' ability to evaluate fake news, and we're looking at our ads policies to improve and toughen rules against sites that misrepresent their nature.
Mr. Edgett.
Coming out of the 2016 election and early this year, our CEO asked our entire engineering, product, and design teams, which make up a large majority of the company, to tackle the problem of safety, abuse, and misinformation on our platform, and to drop everything else they were doing and to figure this out. We formed what we call an information quality
Those
team.
are 3 sentences. What are the changes?
Yes, we formed an information quality team focused on looking at both behavior and content and seeing how we could stop bad actors from using automated activity to amplify their message. We have just announced new transparency rules around not just political ads, but all advertisements to educate not just American citizens, but our worldwide users. We are also continuing to collaborate with law enforcement and committees like this to make sure we're putting the right policies.
I know very few specifics from that answer. Mr. Stretch.
Senator, let me try 4 things. First, today there are 10,000 people working at Facebook on safety and security across our security, product, and community operations teams. By the end of 2018, there will be more than 20,000. Second, we announced last week a series of ad transparency steps drawing on the ideas in the Honest Ads Act that Senator Warner talked about earlier that will bring much greater visibility to advertising generally and particularly to political advertising. Third, we are tightening our ad policies to limit divisiveness and to limit violence in the use of our ad tools. And fourth, we're standing up an organization to enable better industry sharing of threat information and also to help us work better with law enforcement so that we can share information and expertise in order to address this threat going forward.
My last question is, it's not clear that you all or the public understand the degree of this sophisticated and manipulative intelligence operation. The Russians created Facebook pages, posted YouTube videos, all trying to appeal to specific audiences. Some of the content wasn't fake. It was intended to gather an audience and gain trust. It told people that they were already receptive to, that after gaining that trust, you could execute the espionage. For example, by gathering liberals and then discouraging them from voters. Mr. Stretch, I'd like you to confirm that this technique was used in the election.
Senator, we've provided all the information we can about the content that we've identified on the system. I think to make the sort of assessment you're describing really requires this committee's work to look at all of the online and offline activity that would be necessary to effectuate a campaign like that.
My time has expired. We have specific cases that was used. I would like in writing within a week what you're doing about it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It is very clear that Russian activities on your social media platforms go far beyond the paid political ads that appeared last year. The primary purpose of Russia's active measures is to exploit and aggravate the divisions in American society and to undermine public confidence in our democratic institutions. And those efforts have not stopped. They continue to this very day. As Senator Risch has pointed out, no area of the country is immune. So let me give you an example, and we've passed it out to you, by describing 3 unpaid posts from Facebook pages created by the Russians that referred to the governor of Maine, Paul LePage. There are 2 negative posts related to the governor on one Russian Facebook page called Williams and Calvin that appeared in August of 2016. There's a video of comments made by Maine's governor from that same month. And the post in part says the following. LePage called up white people to kill blacks. After this statement, we can clearly see what kind of people serve in American government. White racist supremacy, that's for sure. The only way to avoid mass killings of black people is to fire LePage and all who have the same racist beliefs from American government. There was a second post on the same website about 10 days later. Let me just read part of that. It is not a secret that America is the country of white supremacy, and people like LePage must be replaced from their positions in the government. America doesn't need racist politicians. Black people are tired of white supremacy. Then this year, in August of 2017, Maine's governor was the subject of a positive post on a different Russian-backed Facebook page called Being Patriotic. In this case, the post defended comments that the government made at the time about Confederate monuments. The post ends with its own incendiary conclusion. It says, when even the governor is not safe from leftist haters, then what can we say about ordinary citizens? Liberals are now acting like terrorists. They try to intimidate everyone who disagrees with them, hope our police will take appropriate measures against these cowards. Now, let me point out something. Our governor was not up for re-election last year. He is term limited. He cannot run for re-election as governor. And yet, these comments were made both last year and just a few months ago. And the posts are just 3 among 80,000 that reveal the Russian playbook of playing both sides off against each other and of sowing discord and division with inflammatory rhetoric. And there were other posts that involved lower-level officials in the state of Maine that we found as well. And the Russians continue to push this kind of divisive rhetoric to this very day. So my question to you is, what are you, as American companies, doing to effectively counter unpaid content posted by the Russians that is clearly designed to specifically polarize and anger the American people? And I would argue that you have a special obligation here, given your reach in American society and the fact that you are patriotic American companies. Mr. Stretch.
Senator, we agree that we have a special responsibility here. We value the trust that users place in our services, and when they show up to connect with friends and family and to discuss issues, they need to know that the discourse they see is authentic. What is so painful about this type of content is that it exploits truly and passionately held views and then inflames them to create more discord and more distrust. To prevent this, we are investing much more heavily in authenticity. We believe that one of the cornerstones of Facebook is that users are known by their real names. And so that creates a level of authenticity in the discourse that users can trust when they come to the platform. This sort of content erodes that trust, and it's contrary to everything we stand for as a company. As Americans, it's particularly painful because it is so exploitative of the openness of our society. And so the investment we are making and the commitment we are making is to ensure that our authenticity policy is more effectively policed and monitored to prevent exactly this sort of behavior.
Mr. Edgib, what is Twitter doing?
We're focusing on a number of things. The one we see the greatest strides in and where we see the greatest effect and protections from our users is on the amplification side. In the use of automated accounts, these bad actors need an audience for their voice, and generally they don't have a followership, so they are trying to use activity on the platform to automate and amplify their voices. So we're looking behind the message and behind the content at the behavior of doing that, and have been successful in doubling our effectiveness of doing that year over year, and looking at the behavior, taking down millions of accounts every single week because they're not actually humans, they're actually...
Well, this just happened in August of this year. This isn't something old.
Right, we continue to try to stay ahead of their activities. We're also looking at things like coordinated human activity, where real people are coming together, like the IRA, and actually putting out divisive content like this. We were able to link those accounts and take action on them as we learn not just what they're saying, but what's behind it. Only we can see it on the Twitter side. We've had great strides on the terrorism front in that regard, and we believe we can apply the same techniques and methodologies to this moment.
Mr. Walker, thank you.
We're also very concerned about this kind of deceptive and divisive content. We remove it immediately from our services, and we have removed these. Going forward, and actually already, we have engaged in a number of things to avoid the problem of fake news, changes to our algorithms, improving the training that our raters get in evaluating quality, labeling fake news where we can find it, working with third parties, et cetera.
Thank you.
Senator Heinrich.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Stretch, I want to start with you. Last month, President Trump called Russian-purchased Facebook ads a hoax. I've looked at those Russian-sponsored Facebook ads. I certainly hope you've had a chance to review them. Are they, in fact, a hoax?
All the information we've provided to the committee did run on Facebook. So
it's a yes or no answer. I know you're a lawyer. It's hard, but...
No, the existence of those ads were on Facebook and was not a hoax.
So in the interest of just clearing this up and giving the American people some transparency into this so that they can see the nature of what typically gets used to divide the American populace, why not simply release those Russian-financed Facebook ads to the public, redact the pictures, but release the content so that people can understand how this works?
Senator, we believe this committee is really best placed to determine what information to release. We stand ready to assist in that effort. We agree that the more people can see the type of content that ran and the divisions that were sought to be exploited, the better.
Well, I think we have a disagreement on this committee as to whether or not to release those. I would urge all of you as platforms to consider that kind of activity as well. I want to move on to Russia's RBC magazine, which recently revealed that St. Petersburg's troll factory employed hundreds of trolls, including 90 at the quote-unquote U.S. desk alone, and spent about $2.3 million in 2016 to meddle in U.S. politics. actually contacted U.S. activists directly and offered them thousands of dollars to organize protests. Your platforms are all global. They're not just U.S. platforms. And there's substantial open source reporting right now suggesting that similar divisive activity may be occurring, for example, in the Catalonian region of Spain right now. What are each of you doing right now to make sure that your platforms aren't being used in similarly divisive ways across the globe to sow discord in Western democracies? And in particular with the Catalonian example, are you familiar with what you're doing there?
Senator, we are focused on preventing this form of abuse globally. So when we say we have an obligation to protect the platform from being used for abuse, that's a global obligation. So we are focused on elections as they appear on the calendar, including the Catalonian election that occurred recently, as well as the other elections that are on the calendar going forward. We're focused on ensuring that all actors on the platform comply with local law, as Mr. Walker suggested earlier, and we are focused on making sure that any foreign threat actors that are seeking to undermine democracy anywhere are removed from the platform.
Have each of you had to take corrective action against actors in that debate who were not who they purported to be? Mr. Stretch?
Senator, the key, I'd say, progress we've made is...
That's a yes or no once again. Mr. Edgett?
I believe so, but I'll need to follow up with your staff.
Thank you. Mr. Walker?
We're constantly removing fraudulent, deceptive accounts from our services. I'm not familiar with the specifics there.
You can get back to us. Mr. Edgett, given the discussion we've had about automated Twitter accounts and bots, and the range is obviously very wide, but we know that's a problem. And you made a assertion earlier that I want to come back to and just make sure it's accurate. Do you require at Twitter by service agreement that profiles are linked to real names, real people, or some other way to make sure that those go back to real human beings, from social security numbers to other unique identifiers?
We do not. We require some information at sign up, but we don't require you to verify your identity. We have services that verify identities on the platform.
So why on earth not?
Because we see the power of Twitter being used by folks like social or political dissidents, embedded journalists in difficult countries who use the ability to not have to identify themselves by name like on other platforms to speak their truths to power. We see that.
So the reason is for social dissidents and people in third world countries or where there is a hostile government regime, it is not your business model. You're not reliant, for example, on those automated accounts to generate revenue?
We don't rely on, there's some good automation on the platform, and happy to talk about that, but we do not rely on the bad malicious automation that we're talking about here.
If I were running a political campaign today and I were to advertise on local television, on cable television, in print or on the radio or even through the mail, I would have to have a paid for by disclaimer on those ads. Now, Mr. Walker, I believe, has already addressed this issue, but is there any policy reason that online social media ads, given how effective and influential they have clearly become, shouldn't meet that same level of transparency?
We agree with the transparency efforts, and last week announced that we're creating a transparency center, not just for political ads, which will have even more information than all ads, but a transparency center for all ads, so that you can see not just the ad that you've seen and why it's been targeted to you, but all of the other ad creative from that same advertiser. On the election front, you'll also be able to see who's paying for the ad, how much they've spent on this ad campaign and all ad campaigns, and you'll be able to see what the targeting criteria are, so to better educate around why these ads are on the platform.
I appreciate that, Mr. Edgett. Mr. Stretch.
The same is true for Facebook. We are working both on political ad transparency, enabling more visibility into campaign ads by third parties, and also enabling campaigns to meet their disclosure obligations in their online communications.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Blunt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Edgett, in response to Mr. Heinrich's question, there was a lot of information that you could get based on that policy if you pursue it, like all the other ads they ran. How much would you get that by going to another spot? Surely that's not all right there on the ad.
Obviously, we're a character-constrained platform, so we will be identifying very clearly whether or not something is a political ad so that you can see it right away. And then depending on if you're on a web browser or on a mobile phone, you'll have to hover over or click on a spot to then see sort of a full transparency center that gives you all of that information
So
right
would
away.
you be able on the ad itself to go ahead and put enough of a disclosure there that it's clear when you're looking at the ad who paid for it and how to find more information out about who paid for it?
Yeah, we're still working through the technical details, but believe we'll be able to get that in front.
Mr. Walker, are you trying to do anything similar to that?
We are, our idea is to have an icon that a user can click on so it's immediately available to them when they see the ad.
But it wouldn't necessarily be, would any information be on the ad except the icon?
It depends on the format of the ad. There may be in display context or video context where it makes more sense in a very small amount of space. The FEC has struggled with figuring out appropriate disclosure requirements. We continue to look at that.
And you're looking at the other disclosure requirements that other ads have to have on other media as you're considering this?
Across broadcast, newspapers, and
Mr.
online.
Stretch?
Yes.
The same is true for
Looking at
Facebook.
the same thing. Well, when you're talking, I think I'll start with Mr. Edgett on this. When you're talking about Russians, are you referring to the Russian government or any Russian citizen or people who paid in rubles? You mentioned the IRA, which I assume is not either your individual retirement account or the Irish Republican Army. So how do you know they're Russians, and what are you looking for there when you're talking about Russians in retrospect?
Right, that's a great question. We're looking for signals. Not everyone identifies themselves as a Russian, especially these malicious actors. So we're looking at things like whether they registered in country in Russia. Do they have a Russian phone number? Are they on a Russian mobile carrier? Do they have a Russian email address? Are they coming in from a Russian IP? Have they ever logged in? You'll see in our retrospective work, we looked at, have you ever logged in at any time from Russia? There are some technical challenges with that. The trail sometimes goes cold at data centers where information is being processed. We saw about 14%.
Okay, looking back at what the so-called Russians, and however we're defining that, did during the election, when you're saying the Russians paid for these ads, these are ads paid for by the Russians because you've now gone back and checked groups like the research agency, the Internet Research Agency, and you now know that's a Russian group?
Well, on the advertising side, we also have some additional data around banking information because folks are paying for these ads. But we didn't link the IRA accounts to advertising in the election. But what we did was found 9 advertisers based on the signals I talked about and also banking information. Largely it was Russia Today, who we since removed as advertisers from the platform.
Well, let's see if they got their money's worth. Everybody here has been involved in one way or another in buying advertising. I've always had some sense that in advertising, you pretty much got what you paid for. Mr. Stretch, how much money did the Russians spend on ads that we now look back as either disruptive or politically intended? Is that $100,000? Is that
approximately
I meant
$100,000.
from your company.
Yes, approximately $100,000.
How much of that did they pay before the election? I've seen the number 44,000. Is that right? 56 after, 44 before?
The ad impressions ran 46% before the election, the remainder after the election.
46%. Well, if I had a consultant that was trying to impact an election and spent only 46% of the money before Election Day, I'd be pretty upset about that, I think. But so they spent $46,000. How much did the Clinton and Trump campaign spend on Facebook But I assume
Yeah.
before the election.
Before the election.
They were better organized than the other group.
Combined approximately $81 million.
81 million, and before the election.
Yes.
So 81 million, I'm not a great mathematician, but 46,000, 81 million, would that be like 1/1000%? It's something like that.
It's a small number by comparison, certainly.
Very small number by comparison. So the fact that we're talking about it today, they certainly, it seems like they got their money's worth after the election, whether they got it before or not, that we're still talking about 0.005% of the Facebook money spent. And that was just by Clinton and Trump, or was that all the presidential candidates put together?
No, those were the
81 million.
Those were the Clinton and Trump campaigns combined.
Well, probably got more attention here than they did. If you're, I know Ferguson, Missouri, and Baltimore were a couple of big targets in a lot of these ad campaigns. Is there a way you could do this to where you principally target viewers in the St. Louis area for Ferguson or in Maryland for Baltimore?
It's important to distinguish between our ad tools and the organic tools. Our ad tools do permit geographic targeting of content. Approximately 25% of the ads that we've identified and turned over to the committee were geographically targeted to a region smaller than the United States. Most of them were targeted on a state basis. Organic content, unpaid posts, if you will, are not geographically targeted.
And some of those targeted dollars were spent in states where the election turned out not to be close at all. Is that right?
That's correct.
The other questions that we'll get to maybe in writing later, but on the free media, I think we have to be very thoughtful here about who decides what's voter suppression and what's not, who decides what level of speech is acceptable and what's not. It's an unbelievable obligation that the government's never been very good at, and an unbelievable obligation that it sounds like to me your companies are all being asked to assume, and that'll be an ongoing discussion, I think, of whether that's possible or not, and the questions and problems that arise when somebody does begin to decide what's acceptable to talk about and what's not, and what discourages voters and what doesn't. I would think the general election process these days would discourage voters from participating, so maybe that would just mean none of it could be discussed, but we will see how that goes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator King.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, you've done a good job this morning. I must say, though, I'm disappointed that you're here and not your CEOs, because we're talking about policy and the policies of the companies, and it's fine to send general counsel, but I think if you could take a message back from this committee, if we go through this exercise again, we would appreciate seeing the top people who are actually making the decision. I want to begin by two quotes, and I generally don't read quotes, but these are so apt. The first one says this: "Nothing was more to be desired than that every practicable obstacle should be opposed to cabal, intrigue, and corruption. These most deadly adversaries of Republican government might naturally have been expected to make their approaches from more than one quarter, but chiefly from the desire of foreign powers to gain an improper ascendant in our councils." That's Alexander Hamilton in the 68th Federalist. He saw this coming. The other is a more recent quote from a fellow named Vladimir Koshkov, who's a former GRU officer, and he said, "A new type of war has emerged in which armed warfare has given up its decisive place in the achievement of the military and political objectives of war to another kind of warfare, information warfare." And that is exactly what we're talking about here today. And I think I appreciate the chair and the vice chair giving us the context of what we're doing. Their visual demonstrations, I think, were very vivid, and the warfare is the division of our society. And it's not only us, it's the entire West. We know that the Russians were involved in the French election. We know that they were involved in the German elections. We are now learning that they're involved in the separation of Spain. And my understanding is they've set up shop in Scotland, which is talking about an independence vote from Great Britain. So this is a sophisticated worldwide strategy that applied here in 2016. There's one other piece I'd like to add to what the chair and the vice chair did, and that is that it's still happening. This is a service of the German Marshall Fund called, interestingly, Hamilton 68, that follows hashtags on a daily basis. And I just picked a day in September to show these are the hashtags that are being propagated. Weren't created by Russians, but these are 600 Russian websites that are using, these are the hashtags that they did on these particular days. And the interesting thing, Syria's up there. Clearly Russia has an interest there. But then we have the NFL, and then we have boycott the NFL, then we have stand for our anthem, we have Make America Great Again, Russia, take a knee. In other words, they were tweeting on both sides of the NFL dispute in order to exacerbate the divisions. One witness this committee had said that their strategy is to take a crack in our society and turn it into a chasm. And that's exactly what we saw in 2016. And my point here is it hasn't stopped and it won't stop. So we have to figure out what to do about it. And it seems to me that there are three possibilities, one of which you can make a significant contribution to. The other two, frankly, are up to us. The first is a technical defense, the kind of thing you've already been talking about today, checking identities, identifying the source of this kind of information. And I want to pursue that in a minute. The second is we as a society have to understand when we're being conned. I spent some time a year ago in Eastern Europe before our election, and the Eastern European politicians, all they wanted to talk about was Russian meddling in their elections. And I said, how do you defend yourself? You can't undo the internet. You can't turn on the TV. They said, all of our people now get it, that this is what the Russians are doing. And when they see one of these postings, they say, oh, it's just the Russians again. We have to develop that level of sophistication so that we know when we're being misled. And to me, the mentality is the same one we all apply at the checkout counter of the supermarket, and we see a tabloid that says a movie star had a two-headed baby. We say, oh, that's just a tabloid. We need to apply that same kind of sensibility to these kinds of fake news, misleading, and purposeful distortions. The third thing that we have to determine, I think, is that this country has to have some kind of cyber warfare deterrent capacity. Right now, there's no price to be paid for meddling in our democracy. And our adversaries have to understand that if they're going to undertake a campaign like this, there will be a price to be paid, there will be results, and if they do X, we are going to do Y to them. Right now, that doesn't exist, and all of what the Russians did last year has basically been a free pass. And I think that's a very difficult problem. Now, let me ask a technical question. Mr. Stretch, could you, for example, require a date line on a posting that said where it comes from, just like a news story says Moscow, September 23rd. Is there some way to identify the source of information as it comes across your news feeds?
Senator, it's a great question. We do permit users to identify the geographic location of the post. We don't require it. There are oftentimes privacy considerations that would prevent a user from...
You could require it by country, couldn't you?
There are many uses of our services, Senator, where requiring people to designate their physical location could be problematic. I would make two other points. One is because of the way the internet is architected, your geographic location can be disguised. That's something we need to work on in order to make sure we're not being fooled, because I think your larger point is an excellent one. The geography of the location of the user paired with the content they're serving
Part of the information.
is part of the information, and we need to do a better job tuning our systems to be more sensitive to that.
Mr. Walker, you said something similar. You said they, being the people, should know what they're getting. When we get information, we know it's in a newspaper. We see the name of the author. We see the dateline. And we're in a new information distribution world here, and we need to think about how to apply some of the principles that have helped us to assess that information. And I hope that you all will continue to develop policies just as the newspaper business did 100 years ago, that help your customers to analyze and assess the validity of the data. The problem now is we're just taking what comes as it comes. I'll end with this. I have a quote on my kitchen wall that my wife found, and it said, "The great problem with quotes on the internet is determining whether they're authentic. Abraham Lincoln." Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Langford.
Gentlemen, thank you for being here. I hope you hear loud and clear from this committee. There are lots of questions. You're asking lots of questions. This is not an opposition to free speech, though. This is actually a battle to try to protect free speech. We want to have good American dialogue. And the fear is that your platforms are being used by foreign actors that want to abuse our free speech. If two Americans have a disagreement, let's have at it. Let's walk it through as two Americans. If an outsider wants to be able to come do it, we do have a problem with that. And we're trying to be able to work through that. So we're grateful that you're here and to be able to walk through this, and we look forward to cooperation together to be able to figure out how we actually resolve some of these extremely complicated issues. I do want to be able to push on a little bit this issue about the type of ads and the type of content. Mr. Edgett, you have mentioned from your testimony that in Twitter, of the 131,000 tweets posted during the time, and I assume that means that September to November time period that you were tracking, only 9% of those tweets from those Russia-targeted accounts were actually election-related. The others were all social engagement, other issues, and I think that's being lost in the conversation that only 9% of the tweets were election-related. Now, my question is, for all of your platforms, what are you seeing from Russian-related accounts that you're tracking now and trying to be able to pull down or identify? What are the social issues that are being discussed right now from those sites? And I understand you can go back for the last 6 months if you want to, but give me some examples of the type of social issues that they're engaging with. One has already been mentioned by Senator King, and that's the NFL. Either boycott the NFL or take a knee on that. Has that been actively pursued on your sites? Give me examples of topics here.
So one example we saw following the election was an effort by the accounts we've identified to inflame some of the post-election demonstrations we saw. So some of the accounts turned to questioning the Electoral College as an example.
Okay, so let me walk through multiple examples here. So Electoral College is one of them. Some of them have been publicly reported that the site was used to try to organize events that were election protest events in certain cities, that it was sending out messages saying we're all going to protest at this spot, but obviously it was created by a Russian group. What else? NFL? Yes or no on that?
We've seen that activity.
Okay, what else? What other issues?
We've seen more limited use of our services, Senator, but among that, I would say police shootings and racial issues.
Okay, what else?
Certainly, immigration has remained a topic throughout.
Okay. Any other issues? This is part of the reason that multiple members, and Senator Heinrich mentioned it earlier, we really do want these ads to get out in the public space. We think there's great value for all of your platforms to be able to say, this is the type of content that foreign actors are actually trying to put out that are divisive content. When we put it out, that's one thing. When you put it out, it's completely different. We think there's a great benefit for you to be able to say, when you're aware of things, please note this is the type of issue that's coming out, and this is what it looks like. And so people can say, that's the type of thing I've seen before, or they can say, I've actually liked on that before and didn't have any idea that that was Russian-related. That'd be helpful. Can I ask a question? When were you aware of Russian activities on your platform during the election time? During the election or before your election? When were you aware that entities within the Russian government, whether that be the Internet Research Agency or other individuals that you knew of that were Russian, either government-related or at least policy-related, were involved in election issues on your platform? Before or after the election? And all three of you can say. Before or after?
We were aware of Russian state actors active on the platform prior to and through the election, separate from the Internet Research Agency, and we communicated with law enforcement about our concerns at the time. These actors were engaged in more traditional cyber threat activity, focusing on account compromise as well as trying to direct attention to stolen information that was hosted on other sites.
How far back? Early 2016, 2015?
We had seen activity as early as 2015.
Okay. Mr. Edgett.
Twitter also saw activity from the IRA on our platform and took large-scale action to take down accounts in 2015. We generally are aware of intelligence community reports, so became aware of the activity in the report that came out in January of this year. And then obviously through the retrospective work have uncovered the sort of what we think is the full extent. We're continuing to look and to research that issue.
Okay. Mr. Walker.
We've been looking at cyber espionage issues, accounts compromise issues for many years. It was only after the issuance of the report in January that we took a deeper dive on the particular kinds of things we're talking about here today.
One of the things that we're trying to address is getting additional information. Getting the ads I mentioned out before would be very helpful. Getting the type of posts that have been done would be very helpful to the American people to be able to see. Getting the statistical information would also be helpful. The statistics that you've given us are the number of accounts that are related to this, but it's not giving us the breadth and the depth of those accounts once they're activated. So, for instance, it's helpful to know that 1% of those accounts were Russian-related, but what we're not getting statistically is, was that 1% the first 1%? They actually created it, launched it, and then millions of people saw it after that. Are they in the middle stirring it and advancing it, or were they beginning it? That would be helpful to us as well. And I know you have that data to be able to see, did they start it? Were they in the middle of broadcasting it? So just giving us the percentage of users that shared it doesn't help us. Knowing when in that process and what happened after that, that's what helps us. Y'all have done a lot of work on terrorism, on Islamic extremism, on the advance of ISIS. You've done a lot of work on child pornography, on human trafficking, on the sales of illegal drugs on your sites. We're asking for help on this area as well. Now, this is something that I would hope that we do not have to engage legislatively, or if we do, it's the lightest possible touch. This is something you have been actively engaged in other topics, and we look forward to cooperation in this as well, so that y'all are managing that. But I do hope in the days ahead we continue to protect a platform for free speech to allow individuals to be able to speak their opinions, whether it's agreed or disagreed on by other Americans, so Americans can engage in that dialogue. Thank you.
Senator Manchin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all. RT, the Russian state news organization, the federal intelligence officials call the Kremlin's principal international propaganda outlet. RT America TV broadcasts negative programs, derogatory information about the United States. It's essential information warfare directed against the United States. According to the unclassified intelligence report released on the 2016 elections, the Kremlin staffs RT and closely supervises RT's coverage, recruiting people who can convey Russian strategic messaging. Additionally, the Kremlin spends $190 million a year on the distribution and dissemination of RT programming. Can you all answer, do any of your organizations allow RT to purchase space or advertise on your accounts?
We've offboarded, which means we've banned Russia Today and their related accounts from advertising on the Twitter platform.
That's effective as of when?
That was effective as of a week or so ago.
We have reviewed the RT accounts, and as you know, RT advertises extensively in newspapers, magazines, airports across the United States. We've not found violations of our accounts, but we are focused on making sure that there's enhanced transparency with regard to government-funded broadcasting of all kinds, whether that's RT or Al Jazeera or other sources.
Mr. Stretch?
The same is true for Facebook, Senator.
Well, it says here that RT uses Google's, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter as the main distributors of their content. So you all have been the main go-to to get their propaganda out to the United States to do harm to us.
That may be true online, Senator, but of course RT is covered by, RT channels are included on major cable television networks, satellite television networks, hotel television choices, et cetera. So it is a problem that goes beyond the web.
Let me ask this question, if I may. Kaspersky Labs, their antivirus software, do any of you all have it on your personal computers? Your personal computers are using Kaspersky Labs?
No, sir.
Does your company use Kaspersky?
I do not believe so.
Could you check and find out?
We will follow up.
How about any of the other two?
Not aware, but we'll follow up with your staff.
Likewise.
Do you all have any doubts about Russians' involvement to interfere in our 2016 president election? Do you have any doubts at all that Russia intervened, interfered, and had a profound outcome, is basically on our outcome to our election? Do you all have any thoughts on that? Do you have any doubts about that?
We have no doubt that there were attempted efforts at interference. It's something we're focused on addressing going forward. In terms of whether it had an effect on the outcome, that's not something we're in a position to judge.
Well, let me ask this. Are you or your CEOs concerned about the threat and damage your companies can do to the U.S. with your far-reaching power? And you have been identified as the major distributors of fake news? Are you concerned about that? Do your CEOs, do you talk about the threats to the United States of America where you're domiciled? Or is it basically just a business model that you're worried about?
We're deeply concerned. This is an issue that we talk about constantly. As I said earlier, the first part of this year, we pointed our entire engineering, product, and design team on tackling the issues of information quality, abuse of our systems, and protecting our users.
I join that. It's absolutely a very serious issue. The North Star of Google is to provide accurate, comprehensive, relevant information to people. We don't always get that right, but we have tens of thousands of engineers who are trying to improve our algorithms, improve the rating guidelines we use for individuals, address the problem of breaking news, which is a very challenging one to get right when there's just not a lot of content out there. So we take this very seriously.
Well, you all would agree then, I guess, with the legislation that's been introduced by different members and bipartisan members of this committee and other committees, that you all should be regulated and overseen the same as we do other news medias? Anybody have, Mr. Stretch, you have any idea on comment? Are you all going to fight back on that, lobby against it, or are you going to basically support the legislation that's going to be needed to make sure that the American people are getting the facts and not fake news?
Senator, we stand ready to work with the committee on legislation. Any particular pieces of legislation, we're certainly happy to
You've seen
talk
the
about.
legislation that we put out there. You all three are lawyers. I'm sure you're watching it very closely. You know, the legislation that we have. Do you agree with the exemption? Would you support a change in a law that treats all political advertising on the internet the same as print and broadcast ads, to require identification of sponsors, and basically the legislation we're putting forth?
Very supportive of the direction of the Honest Ads Act, and have had really productive
So
conversations.
you all will be
around it.
speaking in support of these pieces of legislation?
Yeah, we have some fine tuning that we'd love to talk about, but we, as you saw, put out our own transparency center that very much aligns with the information that the Honest Ads Act was asking us to provide to you.
According to an Oxford University study released in October, Russian trolls are now targeting American military personnel and veterans on Twitter and Facebook. Allegedly, these trolls are pushing fake news and injecting them into veterans groups and to active duty personnel. In fact, one fake Facebook page was highlighted in a Stars and Stripes article from October the 18th. The page was called Vietnam Vets of America, and it had attracted a follower network of nearly 200,000. The real veterans organization, Vietnam Veterans of America, call it an imposter page, and another example of how military and veterans are being targeted with this information. A week after the original article was reported on October 18th, Facebook reportedly took down the site, ostensibly for violating intellectual property of the Real Veterans Service Organization. So I would ask Facebook and Twitter And this story, is the story accurate? Did you all know about this? And are you seeing our military and our veterans being targeted? And how come it took so long to take it down?
Senator, we're intensely proud of the use of Facebook by our military. You
We're not
asked,
talking about,
right.
we're talking about the people
And
who
we're-
are targeting them.
Yes, and we are very focused on making sure that it remains an authentic experience for them. We receive many reports of inauthentic behavior. We try to act on them quickly. We're trying to improve our tools to detect it even before it's reported to us. I'm not familiar with the particular page you've
Stars and
described.
Stripes.
Yes, but
I hope you'll check into that.
I will certainly check into it, Senator.
Let me just say this as my time's wrapping up. You can see that all of us are very much, this is not a Democrat or Republican issue. This is an American issue that we're concerned about, the security of our nation. We're getting hit from every way you possibly can imagine. And you all are the largest, one of the largest distributors of news. And there can be no doubt that it has to be authentic and true. You cannot allow what's going on against the United States of America. You are in the front lines with us. And we're doing everything we can to support our military, our veterans, all the people who put their lives on the lines. And what you're doing by allowing this fake stuff to come across, this misleading, this damaging information, is really threatening the security and the safety of our, and really the sovereignty of our nation. I would hope that your CEOs, and I agree with Senator King, I wish that your three CEOs would be here. They need to answer for this. It can't be a business model. It's got to be a security issue. Thank you.
Senator Cotton.
Thank you, gentlemen, for your appearance this morning. Mr. Edgett, I want to discuss Twitter's history of cooperation with our intelligence community. Last year, in an open hearing before this committee, I asked then CIA Director John Brennan about Twitter's decision to prohibit a subsidiary called Dataminer from working with our intelligence community. Director Brennan stated that he was disappointed in Twitter's decision, but at the same time, we learned that Twitter was refusing to work with the CIA and the rest of the intelligence community. We also learned that Twitter was pitching Russia Today and Sputnik propaganda arms of the Kremlin to sell advertisements for profit. So in essence, last year, Russia was beginning its covert influence campaign against the United States, and Twitter was on the side of Russia as opposed to the national security interests of the United States. How can your company justify this pattern of behavior to its fellow citizens?
We work frequently and hard with law enforcement all the time. We do have global policies that prohibit the use of our data hoses or publicly available data around tweets for purposes of surveillance. But we allow law enforcement to use data miner and Twitter products around news alerts, first response technology to see what's going on in an area if a 911 call is made and an emergency responder is going somewhere. But we do not allow surveillance based on Twitter data.
Did Twitter cut off the CIA and the intelligence community from Dataminer last year?
We asked that our policy of surveillance be applied consistently to all organizations, and I believe that Dataminer has been enforcing that policy.
Did it cut off RT and Sputnik?
As to Russia Today, when we approached Russia Today last year to talk about our advertising products and to sell them our advertising services, they were approached as a regular media organization, like a BBC or an NPR.
Do you consider RT to be a regular media organization?
Obviously not now. Coming out of the D&I report earlier this year and the retrospective work that we've done most recently, we don't. And that's why we have banned Russia Today from advertising on the Twitter platform.
So there's a difference, though, between the advertising question, which was improvident, and the use of Dataminer. According to a Wall Street Journal report to which Director Brennan was responding, Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey vetoed the Dataminer CIA contract at the last minute because he objected to the, quote, optics of continuing to help U.S. intelligence agencies. That Wall Street Journal report also said, though, that customers still getting Dataminer includes RT. Is that an accurate report? John Brennan had no reason to doubt its accuracy.
I don't have the information, but we'll follow up on Russia Today's use of Dataminers products, which is the third party where we have a relationship. I believe Mr. Dorsey wanted to make sure that our policies were being applied consistently around surveillance.
Do you see an equivalency between the Central Intelligence Agency and the Russian intelligence services?
We're not offering our service for surveillance to any government.
So you will apply the same policy to our intelligence community that you apply to an adversary's intelligence services?
As a global company, we have to apply our policies consistently.
This reminds me of the old line from the Cold War of one who did not see a distinction between the CIA and the KGB on the other hand, because a KGB officer pushed an old lady in front of an oncoming bus, and the CIA officer pushed the old lady out from the path of the oncoming bus because they both go around pushing old ladies. I hope that Twitter will reconsider its policies when it's dealing with friendly intelligence services in countries like the United States and the UK, as opposed to adversarial countries like Russia and China. Would Twitter entertain the possibility of once again allowing the intelligence community to use data miner?
We do today for purposes of news alerts and first response technology, getting information on certain areas. We do not allow anyone, our policy is not to allow anyone, for the purposes of user privacy, to use our technology to run surveillance.
Okay, let's move on to another hostile intelligence services. Other than Vladimir Putin and Russia, I can't think of anyone who's more involved in the efforts to influence our election last year than Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. The current director of the CIA, Mike Pompeo, as well as this committee in our annual Intelligence Authorization Act, has labeled WikiLeaks a non-state hostile intelligence service who aids hostile foreign powers like the Kremlin. Yet, to my knowledge, Twitter still allows them to operate uninhibited. Is that accurate?
We have terms of service and rules that apply to all users, and we'll apply those consistently and without bias. We take action on accounts like WikiLeaks.
Is it biased to side with America over our adversaries?
We're trying to be unbiased around the world. We're obviously an American company and care deeply about the issues that we're talking about today. But as it relates to WikiLeaks or other accounts like it, we make sure that they're in compliance with our policies just like every other account, and have and will continue if we need to take action.
So you'll be unbiased towards WikiLeaks and Julian Assange, but you will take down videos of people like Marsha Blackburn, a Republican running for the United States Senate.
Marsha Blackburn's video was never removed from the Twitter platform. She ran that tweet and that video as an advertisement, and we have different standards for our advertisements than we do for the organic tweets and content on our platform, because we're serving ads to users who haven't asked to follow Representative Blackburn or others. And we want to make sure that that's a positive experience. And so our policies have a different standard. And in that case, we had users reporting that it was inflammatory and upsetting, and it was initially taken down. We're making these tough calls all the time. And in that case, we reversed the decision and allowed the advertisement to continue to run. But we never took down Representative Blackburn's tweet or allowed her not to convey that message to those who are following her and to engage in the dialogue with her.
Mr. Edgett, I know that you're the acting general counsel, not the general counsel. And if you were the general counsel, these decisions are made at the CEO and the board of directors level. But I have to say, most American citizens would expect American companies to be willing to put the interests of our country above, not on par with, our adversaries, countries like Russia and China, or non-state actors like WikiLeaks or individuals like Julian Assange. As many other members of this committee have expressed, I think your companies have accomplished amazing things for our country and its citizens and made our lives better in many ways. I also support the channels that you've created for free speech, especially for some oppressed or persecuted people around the world. But this kind of attitude, I would submit, is not acceptable to the large majority of Americans, and it's going to be part of what would lead to unwise or imprudent regulation, not sensible and smart regulation. My time's expired.
Thank you. California is home to many of the world's most successful technology companies, and we're proud of that. And we also know that with that great success comes great responsibility. Your companies therefore have a great responsibility to the American public. And as you know, you are the modern town square and the modern postmaster. You are the phone company and the Yellow Pages. You are the newspaper and the radio broadcaster and the television station. And you are the emergency alert system. Your decisions fundamentally inform public discourse. So our nation's enemies have used your platforms in a way that has been designed to create and disseminate and advertise hateful rhetoric with the intent and the effect of disrupting our democracy, and that, of course, is why we're all here. I have several questions, but I'd like to start with what I think is, frankly, an elephant in the room, and I'm holding up the SEC Form 10Q that has been filled out by each of your companies, and your response to this is pretty much the same, but I have in front of me that from Facebook, but Twitter and Alphabet has the same information. There's a section here which requests what are the risks related to the business. And it reads, if we fail to retain existing users or add new users, that will be a problem for us. It goes on to say, we generate substantially all of our revenue from advertising. The loss of marketers or reduction in spending by marketers could seriously harm our business. It goes on to say our advertising revenue could also be adversely affected by a number of other factors, including adverse legal developments relating to advertising, including legislative and regulatory developments and developments in litigation. So my question to you is, I'd like to talk specifically about American ads, not the Russian ads, American ads that run on your platforms. There are legitimate ads that appeared alongside of the Russian placement and propaganda pages on Facebook, on Twitter, and even on YouTube. So can you please tell me that as it relates to those those advertisements on Facebook, on Twitter, or in YouTube, how you are addressing that, and in particular, how much money did you make off of the legitimate ads that ran alongside the Russia propaganda? And we can start with Alphabet or with Google, please. And that would be the advertisements that ran before your videos on YouTube.
Sure. The total amount of advertising we discovered across our platforms was $4,700 from the Russian sources.
That's not my question.
I understand.
My question is American advertising or legitimate advertising. How much money did you make from legitimate advertising that ran alongside the Russia propaganda?
A de minimis amount, Senator. I don't have it in front of me. We'd be happy to follow up.
Okay. What about for Twitter?
I don't have the data, but I will follow up. And
Have you not looked into that?
I believe, are you asking how much advertising revenue we made for the period totally?
I'm asking how much advertising revenue did you receive from legitimate advertisers that advertised alongside or in connection with Russian propaganda?
We haven't done that analysis, but we'll follow up and work on that.
Okay. What about Facebook?
The same is true for Facebook, Senator.
You've not done that calculation?
We've not done that analysis.
Okay, I find that difficult to understand because it would seem to me that we would figure out how much you've profited from Russian propaganda on your platforms. So please do follow up with us as soon as possible on that. And also, it is critically important that this committee have access to all of the information it needs to understand the Russia propaganda in the 2016 election. So will you each commit to retaining records as you're required to do from the minimum standard of media rating research, but do that and extend it beyond the 11 months that they require and extend it through the completion of our investigation into Russia's interference in the 2016 election? Will you commit to keeping those records during the duration of our investigation?
Yeah, we will keep all relevant records to this investigation and provide them to the committee, yes.
Same goes for Twitter.
Thank you.
Yes.
And as for all three of you, can you please name the senior executive who is responsible in your operation for countering state-sponsored information operations? And if you do not have one, please indicate that as well.
It's a challenging question because we have a number of people across different teams, including our cyber espionage teams, as well as our trust and safety teams. I would say our chief security officer is one such person. Another person would be the head of our trust and safety team. Then we also have separate teams at YouTube who work in these areas.
So I take it you have not designated an individual as part of your executive team who's responsible specifically for state-influenced operations.
I will take responsibility for that, Senator.
Okay, I appreciate that.
That role, there's two people filling that role at Twitter. The first is our general counsel. I'm currently our acting general counsel, so currently it is me. But also our head of our Twitter product, the Twitter product that we all use, has taken responsibility for safety, abuse, and information quality on the platform. So I feel like that's directly related to your question.
Okay, but I'd like you each to appreciate, and everyone to appreciate, that this is a very specific issue with its own pathology, requiring great amount of resources, because we are talking about state-sponsored activity. This is not about an individual conducting this activity and then you need to review it. So as it relates to state-sponsored information operations, I'm requesting that you name whoever is responsible now, but as we go forward, that you designate in your operations someone at the executive level who is responsible specifically for those types of operations, understanding that, as we know now, there are governments that are willing to put incredible amount of resources into manipulating the American public, and it is beyond what you might need to review in terms of activity on your sites that involves issues of posting inappropriate images and things of that nature. Mr. Stretch.
Senator, we have a chief security officer and a threat intelligence team that's acutely focused on this threat. I will take responsibility for our overall response to this threat.
And how many of your employees are dedicated to addressing state-sponsored operations? Specifically, and if there aren't, please follow up in terms of what you're prepared to dedicate to that.
It's a harder question because there are so many vectors that we're investing in. I stated earlier that we have 10,000 people at Facebook across a number of teams who are focused on safety and security generally, and we're doubling that number. The number of people who think of this as their full-time job is something I'll have to come back to you on.
Okay, I appreciate that. And for each of the companies, we'd appreciate that. You can create automated systems that detect foreign propaganda. For example, you could determine whether a user is active during Moscow business hours or connects through a VPN or registers with a fishy voice over an IP telephone number. And you can feed those signals into a machine that can actually create an algorithm that can allow us to indicate or figure out if propaganda is actually being pushed through. Have you done that as it relates to state-sponsored manipulation of elections?
So our technology is agnostic. We have the technology you're talking about, which is an algorithm that helps us catch the bad actors based on their pattern and behavior, and also connect accounts so that if they start new accounts or new networks of accounts, we get those before they tweet. We want to catch that activity all over Twitter. That having automated accounts, malicious actors on Twitter is a bad experience for our users. So we've been tackling that problem for years. And the challenge is, as we get better, these actors get better. And so it's a constant game of cat and mouse and one-upsmanship. But we are committed every single day to making sure that we're removing those actors from our platform.
Okay, my time is running out, so perhaps we can just have quick answers for the remaining folks.
Our answer would be similar.
The same.
Okay, thank you.
Members should be aware that there has been a series of votes started about 7 minutes ago. 2 votes. We've got 2 members left. We're going to move through those and wrap up. And at this time, I would ask unanimous consent that all members be allowed for 7 days to submit questions to our witnesses today. Without objection, so ordered. Senator Cornyn.
Thank you for being here. It strikes me that the United States is operating at a tremendous disadvantage. We are a free and open society. We believe in freedom of the press, freedom of expression, and we respect the privacy rights of individuals. Our opponents have the opposite view. They view information as a tool of warfare while denying their own citizens access to the sort of freedoms, their press, individual thought and expression that we celebrate in this country. But it seems to me that you're at the intersection of this problem, which brings us to why you're here today. I'll restate the chairman's comments when he started by quoting H.L. Mencken, who said, for every complex problem, there's a clear, simple, and wrong answer. And so we need to be very careful, I think, in how we deal with this. But I do think the public needs to understand how your platforms operate. My friend Senator Harris talked about you being the town square and the newspaper, the radio station, but you are more than just a publisher of information. As you point out, most of the income that your companies earn is from data mining. You know more about individual Americans than anybody else, including their own government. And of course, you vow to protect that information and their privacy at the same time, but you use it in order to target ads. Many of us here on the panel have used your platforms in political campaigns to make sure that our message gets to voters who we think might be receptive to our point of view or our platform. But I'd like to know, as a general matter, how do you distinguish between somebody like Senator Feinstein alluded to, using social media as a means to recruit and incite lone wolf terrorists like the one that plowed down unsuspecting New Yorkers yesterday, killing 8 and injuring 11 others? How do you distinguish between that person and a foreign government using your platforms in order to pursue the sort of disinformation and active measures that cause so much confusion and polarization in our election? And how do you distinguish between the way you treat those people on your platforms and how you treat sex traffickers who are targeting young girls and selling them, in essence, for sex? How do you distinguish between those three?
Senator, I'd say none of those activities are acceptable on our platforms. We have strong policies against abuse of platforms to promote hate speech, incitement to violence, sex trafficking, human trafficking, et cetera. In addition, when you have the added layer of a deceptive actor like a foreign government trying to push its points of view in deceptive ways without identifying itself, et cetera, that separately violates another layer of our policies.
Goes back to what we talked about earlier. We also have the same policies prohibiting all of this. We've had the best success so far looking at the behavior and the signals we see only on the Twitter side around how accounts are linked and the activity of those accounts, where they're logging in from, what they're doing with each other, to stop these bad actors before they're even able to tweet. A good example of this is on the terrorism side. We are now able to automatically detect and take down 95% of terrorist accounts, 75% of those before they tweet for the first time. So because we're focusing on behavior and not the content, we don't have to wait for them to get their messages out. We take those down proactively before they're able to speak.
I would just add, Senator, that of the 3 forms of abuse of the platform you described, child safety, terrorism, and foreign interference in elections, the first 2 we've been working on for quite a long time as an industry and with government, and I think we have a proven track record of working well together as an industry and with government to make sure we're taking appropriate steps to address those abuses. We have work to do, but we have made progress. This threat of foreign interference in the elections is something where we do need to up our game, I think, as a company and as an industry and working with government. But the success we've made, or the successes we've had on those first 2 forms of abuse gives me some reason for optimism going forward with respect to our ability to address the foreign interference threat.
For each of you, have the terms of service of your company changed at all since the 2015-2016 actions of Russia? Your terms of service?
Yes, we have changed our policies with regard to ads that are appropriate as well as content that's available on YouTube.
Focused on active measures or on other matters?
Our terms have to do with terms around advertising and terms about what acceptable content is. We are simultaneously using additional tools behind the scenes to identify material.
It's very similar at Twitter.
It's the same as true for Facebook.
Why should your companies be treated any different than the press from a legal accountability standpoint?
We believe as a user-generated content platform that the rules around Section 230 provide a platform to our users around free speech and expression, and don't require us to take a bias on removing content that we fear will violate certain rights. And so we work actively to prohibit things like violence and terrorism and abuse and harassment. And you'll see how we're tackling this problem with urgency and seriousness. But we believe that as a user-generated content platform, we want to allow the free expression and debate without the interference of some of the things that you're talking about.
So you believe you should be treated from a legal standpoint differently than a newspaper, a cable TV show, or a radio show?
Yeah, we're not producing the content. We're allowing users to upload. We have a lot of great journalists and news organizations who are putting content on our platform to share, linking back to their sites. We're offering the service to allow that interchange, that information sharing.
That may well be a distinction that is lost on most of us, that you're just a platform for other people to express their views as opposed to being a publisher in your own right of those views. Finally, let me just ask each of you, please, to continue to work with us on the Stop Enabling Sex Traffickers Act of 2017. As you know, this deals with the Communications Decency Act, which has been used as a bar, a legal bar, to those who've been victims of sexual abuse when they seek to bring the people who facilitated that sex trafficking to justice. And I think there is a way that working together we can come up with something that protects the victims but also maintains the freedom of the internet. And I would just encourage each of you to continue working with us on that so we can reach an acceptable outcome. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Reid.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For all the panelists, starting with Mr. Stretch, when you discovered a deceptive foreign government presentation on your platform, my presumption from what you've said today, you'll stop it and take it down. Do you feel an obligation in turn to notify those people who have accessed that? And can you do that, and shouldn't you do that?
Senator, we feel an obligation, as you say, first to stop the activity, second to investigate it further, to fan out essentially from the account to make sure we're taking an expansive view of the investigation to try to capture any related activity, third to share threat information with the industry and with the government so we can all do a better job, and then fourth to bring the issue to the attention of in this case, this committee. And the content itself, we've said we're supportive of this committee making it publicly available. The question of reaching out to individuals who may have seen it is a much more difficult and complex one, but we believe our commitment to transparency on this issue generally should address that.
Well, technically you could do that, I presume, or you could invest the resources to do it. And as a result, frankly, reporting to us about the nefarious activities of Russia is not going to immediately translate to the thousands or apparently 126 million people who saw the message and thought it was legit. You have the, I presume, the technical skill to do that, is that? And again, apropos Senator Cornyn, you know, you'll see in the newspaper, we correct the statement we made the other day. It was wrong, or it was deliberately wrong. And I think you, given the First Amendment, you can live with that, I hope.
I'm sorry, Senator, could you repeat the question? I didn't.
Well, the question goes back to having an obligation under the First Amendment to notify people who you know have been deliberately misled by a foreign government. Not just us, not just law enforcement.
The technical challenges associated with that undertaking are substantial, particularly because much of the data work underneath our estimate of the number of people who may have been exposed to this relies on data analysis and modeling. That said, we do believe transparency in this area is important, and we are supportive of making as much of this information available to the public as the committee deems warranted.
Mr. Edgett, I deem it warranted for where that's worth. Mr. Edgett?
It's an interesting proposition. We have a team dedicated to information quality and how we present information on the platform. We see as an open platform active dialogue around a lot of this false information, fake information right away. So when you're seeing the tweets, you're also seeing a number of replies to it, showing people where to go, where other information is that's accurate. But we will definitely take that idea back to explore how we could implement a process like that.
Mr. Walker, your platform?
We're somewhat differently positioned in that because we're not primarily a social network, many of our users are not logged in at the time they access content. So it's difficult for us to know exactly who has seen what, but we too will take it under consideration.
Thank you. With respect to the bots, what I've gleaned from the testimony, and please, I'll stop Mr. Walker back again, is that when you can technically identify a bot system operating on your platform, and then am I right to assume that you will shut them down if they were any bot system you will shut down, or particularly a government-related bot system?
When we refer to bots, it's primarily a Twitter issue. I'm not familiar with bots on Google per se.
Well, let's go to Twitter. Well, I'm not the technical expert, but for YouTube is your subsidiary, I presume.
That's correct, yes.
And a lot of the hits on YouTube, I presume, were generated by electronic devices, not people, so that the RT program that was attacking Secretary of State Clinton had a 2% over-the-air audience, but huge number of hits on YouTube. And as a result, you are being unwittingly or wittingly used by bot systems all the time.
Yeah. So an automated view of content really isn't sort of the core issue. What people tend to do on YouTube is try to drive up their perceived view counts to make themselves appear to be more popular than they are.
And they do it by using electronic networks.
That's certainly right. And so across, and this is a problem not limited to this context, many people would like to make themselves appear more popular than they are. So we have a lot of sophisticated tools that are precisely designed to combat that kind of phenomenon.
And you will, if you find it, reduce the number of hits so it's no longer trending?
Either that or remove people from our services for abuses of our terms of service.
So you do have to deal with these bot networks, and you're dealing with...
In that sense, that's correct, yes.
Okay. Bots.
Similarly, we removed as many bad automated accounts as we can find. As I said earlier, some of these bad actors are trying to get more sophisticated, and so we're staying ahead of that by learning from the automated accounts that we're seeing. But we will remove them and have technology to make sure that automated accounts aren't gaming trends, so the trending hashtags that people are seeing on the platform. We will remove their content from search and from the timelines, and we will remove them permanently from the system, once we are able to investigate.
Mr. Stretch, please.
Senator, apologies. We prohibit automated account creation, and in doing so, we're always looking for evidence of accounts being created en masse and engaging in either of the behaviors that Mr. Walker and Mr. Edgett identified.
Thank you. Just a quick question, because my time is just about going. This is a daunting effort. We're being attacked, and you have to go on the offense, the counter-offense, because the way we've structured this system, we have very limited government role in your regulation, your activities, et cetera. And it comes down ultimately to resources. So I would like you to follow up officially, but what % of your revenue are you devoting to these activities? I mean, proactive activities, not, just, if someone complains enough, we'll take it down, but finding bots, thinking about notifying recipients of clearly bad information. So what % do you think, Mr. Stretch, right now?
Senator, I cannot give you a percentage. I can tell you that the company is committed to getting this right. Our most expensive resources are people. And as I stated earlier, we are doubling the amount of people who will be focused on these efforts in the coming year.
Can you get us a number, please, in writing?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Edgett, please.
We also dedicate a lot of resources to this, and I'll follow up with your staff.
Mr. Walker, similarly.
Similarly.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Chair recognizes Vice Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be very brief. I know our time's gone. One, I want to acknowledge Senator Reid, I think, raised a very good question. And if you were in a medical facility and you got exposed to a disease, the medical facility would have to tell the folks who were exposed. The comment as well about TV and radio making corrections. I do think it's an interesting question about what obligation you might have. And I just have to tell you, I think there have been some progress made, and I appreciate some of your efforts. I still find it very disturbing that it appears that, at least from Twitter and Facebook, the sense is that all the Russian active measures only originated with one single troll farm in St. Petersburg, and it still appears that most of the work that you've provided us is derivative of your initial reports. I was hoping very much that you would come in today and either say that was absolutely all it, or we've identified other troll farms or other entities, and I think we've got a lot more work to do. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, for this hearing.
Thank you, Senator Warner. We've come to the close of this, and let me just make a couple of statements if I can. If for some reason you need antitrust waivers to collaborate with each other, please let us know. More importantly, seek for the waiver yourself. This is going to take an overall effort to minimize. I'm not going to use the term eliminate, to minimize the damage and, more importantly, the impact of what Russia is doing, did do, and what others will do next year. I firmly believe that all three of your companies have a new perspective on security, and that you've got, you're at varying degrees of changes that are good. The challenge is, if it fails, the impact of that failure is significantly different than it was in the 2016 elections. I need you to know that up front. You all acknowledge that FEC law applies to you. But it hadn't been lost on me that all of you asked for an exemption from the applicable FEC law. So, you know, I sort of am reminded that a portion of the content posted on Facebook by foreign actors appeared to support one candidate or another. Clearly, it falls within the lines of what the FEC law was there for. And as you know, federal campaign law requires disclosures of sources for ads. I have to put that little thing paid for by. Mr. Edgett, you said you guys are adopting a new thing. I applaud you on that. And I'm sure if I asked you why you didn't apply it, you might have told me before that the FEC law didn't apply to you because they had a hung jury at the FEC. They didn't decide it did, and they didn't decide it didn't. Or maybe it's the excuse that it was small, impractical items, therefore they had an exception to the disclosure. Let me make it perfectly clear. There is no exception to the disclosure as it relates to foreign money used to influence U.S. elections. That is a national security issue. It is a direct attempt to infiltrate the democracy that we have here. And if it's not stated in the law, it should be in your company responsibility to take it on head on. So in the future, I hope that if there's a takeaway from this, it's that everybody's going to adhere to FEC law. If you're a media outlet and you've known that it applied to you, if for some reason you ever questioned whether it was foreign money, then you probably didn't run the ad. I hope that none of you's platform is conditional upon you not verifying where that money's coming from. So the one thing that I didn't hear today, and I hope you will take it back, is the effort to certify who's paying for these things. I, like others, do not want the government to stipulate to any of you what content, especially political content, should look like. By the same token, you're the front line before anything else has to kick in to certify that foreign money is not finding its way into influencing U.S. elections. I wish I could leave today and believe the only thing we have to worry about are elections. The truth is we've spent a tremendous amount of time as two old guys trying to figure out what bots were and things that I don't use. But I have to understand them in a way that, as a policymaker, makes decisions that are best for the future of my kids and my grandchildren, to make sure they've got access to your platforms, to make sure that they can experience things I never dreamed about experiencing and am too old to understand. But I recognize the fact that I can't be influenced just because I don't understand it, because I've got to match my capital with the intellect of all of you at the table and the people that work at all your companies. That is our future. Don't let nation states disrupt our future. And you're the front line of defense for it. Please take that back to your companies. This hearing is adjourned.